Okay, it's time for you to go to bed. But he was directly interrupted by Professor McGonagall. As mentioned before, she was also helpless. After Finny disappeared, Dumbledore immediately asked the professors to go out to find his whereabouts as soon as he came back. However, before they could find any useful information, news came out that the Ministry of Magic was trying to intervene in Hogwarts, and Dumbledore had to return to the school to prove that Hogwarts was still safe. This made the search and rescue operations, which were already difficult to find clues, even worse and made no progress. Regarding the current situation of this matter, many professors, especially those who have taught Finny, are very uncomfortable and anxious. The attackers they captured at the Quidditch pitch drank Veritasrum directly after Dumbledore returned and revealed their identities as members of the vampire rebels. Professors, as well-known wizards in the magic world, have heard about the internal strife among vampires, and they know very well that the base camp of these vampire rebels is protected by the loyalty curse. Now the secret keeper has not died, even if he was captured, even if the arrester tells the address, they can't know the specific location. This resulted in the professors having to go to black markets such as alleys to find information about vampires. Although there was no help from Dumbledore, the professors also destroyed many vampire strongholds during this period. Therefore, now facing George and Fred's inquiries, Professor McGonagall has no other option but to ask them to wait. After the Geminis left, Professor McGonagall did not go directly to rest, but came to Dumbledore's office. There were many people in the office at this time, most of them were members of the Order of the Phoenix. The Order of the Phoenix was an organization established by Dumbledore when Voldemort was in power, with the purpose of fighting against Voldemort's Death Eater organization. The members of the Order of the Phoenix come in all shapes and sizes, ranging from wizards to squibs, aurors, bartenders, and thieves. This is not only because of the difference between Dumbledore's thoughts and Voldemort's pureblood thoughts, but also because these various people are less likely to be suspected and can bring Dumbledore a lot of information that is not easy to find out. Even though a large number of members died in the battle against Voldemort 9 years ago, Dumbledore still did not disband the organization, nor did he make the organization public. Instead, he hid it and became a way for members of the Order of the Phoenix to communicate. An important place for information. Now, Dumbledore has summoned some members of the Order of the Phoenix to Hogwarts because he knows very well that if the vampire rebellion succeeds, then when Voldemort returns, all vampires, a race of dark creatures, will become Voldemort's minions. Although the faction headed by Jonathan would not help Dumbledore and others, they had always remained neutral. Now, Finny has been kidnapped. Under the influence of Veritasrum, it is clear to everyone that it was because Jonathan gave a very important thing to Finny. Dumbledore, I still don't understand why Jonathan would trust the black children. You know, if it weren't for Sirius, the Potters wouldn't either. Alastor Moody stared at his big, round, bright blue magic eyes and asked Dumbledore. As an Auror, after experiencing all the betrayals in the first anti-Voldemort war, he didn't believe anyone except a few people. Not to mention the younger brother of Sirius, Phineas Black, who has a dark history. Dumbledore looked at Moody and said, Alastor, he is just a child, there is no need to doubt this. Moody curled his lips disdainfully. The mysterious man even went to his birthday party back then. Who knows if he might be the mysterious man's minion? Professor McGonagall happened to hear this sentence when she came in, and looked at Moody angrily. Alastor, Black is a very good child and should not be suspected like this. When the mysterious man fell, he was only a 2-year-old child. Moody didn't speak this time. The one who spoke was Dedalo Dig, a wizard with no sense of existence. He occasionally worked as a waiter at the Leaky Cauldron. He expressed great disdain for Mag's words. Minerva, the 2-year-old child you are talking about, stabilized the Black family's industry in 2 years. At the same time, she reported a large number of Death Eaters and shocked many pureblood families. Arthur Weasley spoke. Anyway, if he hadn't been there, my 2 children would have probably died. Besides, Sirius's betrayal does not mean that little Phineas is untrustworthy. Dedalo looked at Arthur and said, You are still so naive. A child who can handle the relationship with the pureblood family and the Ministry of Magic so well at the age of 2. I don't think it is a good thing to underestimate him. Moody's suspicion is necessary, we must determine whether he is a minion of the mysterious man. Mundungus Fletcher, the short thief, spoke. The mysterious man has disappeared, at least there is no doubt that he has disappeared now. Mundungus firmly believed that the mysterious man disappeared because it would not affect his business. As a thief and black marketeer, business was his most important thing. Of course, if Dumbledore clearly told them that the mysterious man when the person comes back, he will believe it and sell his contraband even more crazily. Dumbledore waved his hand, interrupted everyone's quarrel and said. Well, whatever little Mr. Phineas Black is, he is now a student at Hogwarts and we need to find him. Kingsley Shacklebolt said. Yes, the disappearance of this child gave the Ministry of Magic a reason to attack Dumbledore. Millicent Bagno is about to retire. Now he no longer cares about the Ministry of Magic. In the Ministry of Magic, Barty Crouch Sr. was originally the most popular candidate, but because his son is a Death Eater, his reputation is not good now. Many people hope that Dumbledore can become the Minister of Magic. Now, this matter has become an opening for many candidates to attack Dumbledore, and it is completely enough to hinder Dumbledore from becoming the Minister of Magic. As the current Auror of the Ministry of Magic and an important person in protecting the Muggle Prime Minister, he knows many inside stories of the Ministry of Magic. At the same time, he is also one of the few people in the Order of the Phoenix who understands and is good at politics. Kingsley's words made everyone present understand that no matter which side Finny belongs to, whether he is trustworthy or not, they need to find him as soon as possible. Only in this way can it be proved that Dumbledore is not old yet, and Hogwarts it is still the safest place in the wizarding world, even if Dumbledore himself does not think so. Dumbledore sighed slightly, but no one else noticed. He looked at Mundungus and asked. Mundungus, is there any useful information from the magic world right now? I think you have more information than we do. Mundungus said. Vampires have rarely appeared in the black market in the magic world recently, and the few that have been secretive about their internal battles have not mentioned it. Dumbledore frowned and asked. So, you have no clue about Mr. Black? Mundungus nodded and said nothing more. Dumbledore looked at McGonagall and asked. And where is the house elf that lives with our Mr. Black? Professor McGonagall said. After little Phineas disappeared, the elf blamed himself very much. Now he is waiting for news in the kitchen of Hogwarts. Minerva, please bring that house elf here. Dumbledore said to Professor McGonagall, and then turned to look at the photos of previous principals on the wall of the principal's office. Among them was a principal from the Black family, Phineas Black, who had the same name as Finny. Phineas, please run to your old house and ask the elf-named creature to come over with our little Mr. Black's personal belongings. Phineas Black rolled his eyes in the photo and said. It's just for my unsatisfactory descendants, otherwise I wouldn't do this. With that said, he also left the portrait. Looking at Dumbledore's series of orders, Moody asked in confusion. Albus, what are you doing? Before Dumbledore could answer, Snape gave the answer first. He frowned and asked Dumbledore in a cautious tone. Dumbledore, are you going to use that ritual? Dumbledore nodded and said. Looking at the current situation, the vampires will not reveal their internal information. It is impossible for any of us to find out the information about Mr. Black. If this delay continues, I doubt whether his safety can be guaranteed. Guaranteed, so. Before he finished speaking, he was interrupted by Snape. I know time is running out now, but you have to know the price you have to pay to perform that ritual. After hearing this, Moody looked at Snape with confusion and asked. What ceremony are you talking about? Why haven't I heard of it at all? Also, there is a price to pay. What is the price? Professor McGonagall also came to the office with Puff at this time. He happened to hear Moody's question and asked. Dumbledore, what are you going to do? Dumbledore smiled slightly and said. Don't worry, Severus, Minerva, it's just a simple positioning ceremony, there is no need to pay any price. Snape interrupted Dumbledore angrily. I'm not a fool who doesn't know anything. Dumbledore, I know that spell very clearly and understand every step of it. Dumbledore smiled and said. I know, Severus, I knew it when you asked me just now, but now this magic ritual is the best way for us to find Black, isn't it? Moreover, the price is really not as heavy as you think. Snape obviously would not listen to Dumbledore's advice. That is the permanent disappearance of magic power. This is not an ordinary price. After hearing this, the expressions of Moody, Mag, Mundungus and Dedalo all changed. McGonagall looked at Dumbledore. Albus, is he telling the truth? Dumbledore shook his head and said. The consequence of this ritual is that you will lose part of your magic power forever, but the amount is really not that much. Moreover, I am old, so it is a good thing to exchange a small part of my magic power for a descendant who still has a future, isn't it? Hearing this, even the principals on the wall could only sigh, because they understood Dumbledore best, and they also understood that all Dumbledore's actions at this time were definitely not due to the suppression of the Ministry of Magic or the people of the wizarding world. He really wanted to save this little wizard, that's all. Snapped. Suddenly, Creature, the head elf of the Black family, appeared in the principal's office at Hogwarts, holding a piece of clothing in his hand, which was exactly the one that Finny had worn before. Seeing this, Dumbledore smiled and said, "Very good. Now that the conditions are complete, we can start." The movements of his hands became more agile. He found a crucible in the corner and looked at Snape. Snape took the cauldron with a gloomy expression, filled it with water, and added some potion. Items for those who are looking for them. Snape snatched the dress from Creature's hand and threw it into the cauldron. The magic of the Master of Ceremonies. After hearing this, Dumbledore injected part of his magic power into the crucible. Of course, the exact amount is unknown. A contract for those who seek. When Snape finished saying this, Dumbledore took Puff and put her hand on top of the cauldron, and made a cut on her hand, and blood dripped into the pot of magic. In medicine. The originally dark gray potion turned directly to green in an instant, and continued to change color as Snape stirred it. After a while, the potion turned as bright red as blood. McGonagall looked at Snape doubtfully and asked, "What kind of potion is this?" Snape shook his head and said, "This is indeed a potion, but I prefer to call it a ritual." Dumbledore took over and explained. "This is a kind of magic originating from Native Americans, a locating spell. Of course, this magic was originally not so complicated. It is very useful for locating missing people. All it requires is a map and relatives of the missing person. However, this magic can only locate normal locations. If it is in a place that cannot be marked or described, then it cannot be located, even in some enchantments, and it requires the blood of relatives. Therefore, later people improved this spell." Snape said. "The magic spell that only needs to be cast normally has been turned into a magic potion. The missing items are used to determine the target and simple positioning. The magic power of the ritual person is to provide magic power for the magic potion to forcefully break through the knot. At the same time, the contract of the missing person not only enhances the accuracy of the target, but also adds the effect of the contract to the potion, which can force the location of the missing person to be sensed, and can even break through the anti-apparition and go directly to the target." "Around." Dumbledore nodded and said. "However, there are still some problems with the improvement of this spell. It can only locate the target's position when the spell is cast. If the target moves, it won't work." While Dumbledore was explaining, Snape had already put the potion in the crucible into bottles and distributed it to everyone. "As long as you drink this potion, you can know where Blake was taken." Everyone looked at each other and took the potion. The quantity of potions is limited, so naturally it is impossible for everyone present to look for Finny. After some deliberations, Dumbledore, Snape, Moody and Arthur went to find Finny, while the others returned to their posts and continued to hide. Voldemort has not completely returned yet, and now is not the time for the Order of the Phoenix to be exposed. Apparition is prohibited in Hogwarts Castle. Of course, Dumbledore can temporarily lift this restriction. However, at this time, they just wanted to go out to find Finny's whereabouts, and there was no need to lift this restriction. After all, this restriction was also one of the protective measures of Hogwarts Castle. The four of them arrived at the Forbidden Forest. This was no longer within the scope of the castle and they could use Phantom. After drinking the magic potion, a strange place appeared in several people's minds, which was the specific coordinates of the dungeon where Finny was. Because this is a base camp for vampires, vampires come and leave from time to time, so it is not protected by the loyalty curse. Otherwise, even with the magic potion of the locating curse ritual, there is no way to find such clear location coordinates. After determining the specific location, several people apparat to this place. This is also a castle, but unlike Hogwarts, the castle here is much smaller and has some different styles. Hogwarts has many towers and main buildings, but here there are not so many towers, only one main building. Dumbledore stood in front of everyone with his wand in hand, taking the lead in walking towards the vampire's castle. The wand was waved, and the protective measures set up by the vampire castle were as useless as a blank sheet of paper in front of Dumbledore's hundreds of years of accumulation and powerful strength. The four of them were ready for a fight, but they made it all the way to the underground of the castle smoothly without encountering any enemies. It wasn't until they walked down the stairs to the ground that they saw their enemies, but they were all dead enemies. The death appearances of these vampires are different. Some died directly without any trauma, while some actually have their heads dislocated and their bodies are covered with scars. It was the killing curse. Moody looked at a completed corpse and said in a deep voice. There are also traces of cutting and blasting spells. Snape's expression was also very solemn. The four of them felt a little unsure at this time, because the current situation seemed as if someone else had arrived here first and probably took Finny away. Keep going down and see if you can find any clues about Blake. Dumbledore made the final decision on the next task. The four of them continued to walk forward. In addition to vampire corpses, muggle and wizard corpses began to appear on the ground. They were all bitten and pulled to death by vampires. This was a very tragic battle. Arthur said with emotion, holding the wand in his hand tighter. Seeing this scene in front of him, Dumbledore also frowned and became very solemn. Alastair, Severus, Arthur, let's go separately to check the situation here. The truth may be different from what we think. This place has not been attacked. Snape nodded and walked towards the direction they came from, which was towards the castle. Arthur took a look and walked up. Unlike Snape's plan to search the upstairs, he planned to look around the castle to see if there were any signs of attack or escape. Moody walked towards the bottom level, which was the dungeon where Finny and the others escaped. Dumbledore walked towards the innermost part of this layer, where there were the most dead bodies. As Dumbledore walked deeper and deeper, there were more and more corpses on the ground. Finally, he came to the outside of a room, which was also the place with the most corpses. It was also the only place where there were only high-level vampires. A place with corpses and wizard corpses but no low-level vampire corpses or muggle corpses. The most important thing is that the corpses on the ground have wands in their hands, while the corpses before did not have wands in their hands. Pushing open the unclosed door, the scene inside was beyond Dumbledore's imagination. There was only blood but no bodies. Albus, there are 3 vampire corpses in the dungeon below, as well as some muggle corpses. Black's was not found. Moody's voice came from outside, and at the same time there was the click of his steel left foot landing. Here it is. Moody pushed the door that Dumbledore had not fully pushed open completely, looked at the room in front of him and asked doubtfully. A room where a magic ritual has been arranged. Judging from the broken magic array, it should be a teleportation array. It is just a one-time use. The blood here is the material that makes up this magic ritual. There are no traces of habitation here, only some traces of life. These vampires probably did not stay here for long, but came here in a hurry. The surrounding areas of the castle are clean. There are no signs of escape or pursuit. At this time, Arthur and Snape also walked in one after another, and were stunned for a moment when they saw the blood-filled ritual circle in the room. This is... Arthur was a little speechless. As the head of the Weasley family with a family heritage, he knew very well what the magic circle in front of him was used for. After all, the Weasley family's livestock heritage was in alchemy. Is this a blood-directional teleportation array? Moody looked at Arthur and asked. Arthur, what is this thing for? Arthur sighed and said. I also saw it from a notebook at home. This is a magic circle used by vampires. Its function is to teleport vampires to other locations. Because vampires themselves are a type of magical creatures, normal teleportation the magic circle is ineffective against them. In addition, this magic circle can also transmit magic items carried by vampires. However, opening it requires a lot of blood, whether it is muggle or wizard, as long as it is human blood. Dumbledore's eyes were sharp. Yes, this magic circle was very popular in the Dark Ages thousands of years ago. At that time, muggles persecuted wizards, so wizards had no scruples about taking action against muggles. The vampires took this opportunity to collect a large amount of blood and made many such magic circles. However, Grindelwald later destroyed these magic circles. Moody looked at Dumbledore and asked. So this thing was built a while ago? Dumbledore nodded with an ugly expression. He knew very well how much human blood it would take to successfully draw such a magic circle, because he was the one who destroyed those magic circles with Grindelwald. The magic circle was activated, but we didn't find Blake. So, did he leave through this magic circle? Arthur asked. Dumbledore nodded. This is very likely, but unfortunately, we cannot determine where this magic circle leads to. Snape's already ugly face became even darker. So, all our efforts have been in vain. Dumbledore shook his head and said. It's not in vain. At least now we know that Mr. Black himself is also trying to escape. So what we have to do is put pressure on the vampires so that they have no time to estimate Mr. Black. Suppressing vampires is a strategy that all wizards have just decided not long ago. Vampires, who were originally dark creatures, are not actually taken seriously by wizards. However, their recent behavior and the number of sudden appearances have made wizards, especially the pureblood families, were shocked and frightened. They never thought that this race that was almost wiped out by them would now have such a large number of people. Because of the rules of the magical world, vampires are not allowed to transform into wizards, and it is difficult to find corresponding jobs, so pureblood wizards really don't take them seriously. However, you can't convert into a wizard, you can convert into a muggle. If you can't find a job, then open your own shop. This resulted in vampires developing a huge and wide sphere of influence in places where wizards were not aware of it. If the recent vampire infighting hadn't brought all this to light, then no one can guarantee what would happen if the vampires continued to develop. Maybe, both muggles and wizards would be wiped out by the vampires. This is not alarmist. There are indeed very few vampires who can cast spells. However, there are so many of them. After accumulating a large number of people to kill these few wizards, relying on the speed and magic of vampires to control the top muggles, they can subvert the world in a short period of time. Back in time when Dumbledore and the others started the ceremony, Finny and his fellow muggles and wizards walked up the stairs holding the wands they had taken from the vampires. Originally, in their plan, as long as they left the dungeon level and matched the wands of the wizards in the team, they would be able to leave here safely. However, now they realized that they have thought too much. While on the underground level, they encountered a powerful resistance from vampires. However, Finny couldn't understand, were they really worth the vampires' desperate effort to fill them with people? Split into pieces. Finny casually cast a spell, looked at the female aura beside him who taught him the unforgivable curse and said, "We can't go on like this. Let's get to the first floor as quickly as possible and get out of the castle." The female aura nodded, and she also discovered that these vampires were coming in an endless stream, as if there were vampires coming back all the time. But how is this possible? It was just the behavior of some prisoners escaping, and it was not the case that something important had been lost that required such desperate measures. "Finny, Mary, you two take them all up, we are here." An older wizard was locked in the same cell with him. The equally older wizard stood on the periphery of the crowd and cleared the stairs leading to the first floor. He faced Finny and the woman named Mary. Shouted the aura. Looking at the vampires that were still coming, Finny knew that this was the best chance for both of them. He nodded, pulled Mary and ran upstairs. Sure enough, there are no vampires here on the first floor now. The empty hall and the door in front of them all tell everyone that they are about to be free. The muggles began to stop following the leadership of several wizards and ran towards the door and pushed it open. Finny looked at this scene and felt happy. The most fundamental thing for him to rescue these people was to create an opportunity for him to escape. Now the muggles were rioting just right. However, before he could do anything, those muggles came back again. "Run quickly, another monster is coming." Finny was stunned. Could it be that there were vampires coming outside the castle? Thinking like this, the door of the castle was pushed open again, but this time the vampires from outside came in. They were all high-level vampires, holding wands in their hands, and sending out streams of green light at everyone. Finny pulled a muggle in front of him as soon as they raised their wands. The green glowing wand was obviously the killing curse that he had just learned not long ago. As a spell that cannot be resisted by any spell, it can only be avoided and blocked by objects. At this time, the muggle in front of him became Finny's best shield. Those who made the same move as Finny were all wizards in the crowd. After discovering this, some muggles also pulled up the corpses on the ground to block themselves. The crowd blocked the killing curse and looked for opportunities to counterattack one or two of the same spells. They fought and retreated to the underground level again. "Why did you come back?" The old wizard who spoke before asked. At this time, there were only 4 wizards left with them. Finny did not speak, but another wizard in the crowd spoke. "There are people coming from above, and they are all high-level vampires, the kind that can cast spells." "What?" The old wizard was also stunned. He knew very well that the low-level vampires and high-level vampires said goodbye, and he also knew very well what it meant for them to encounter a large number of high-level vampires at this time. Finny nodded and said, "There are indeed many vampires who can cast spells." Mary, the female aura, said sternly, "What should we do now?" Finny pointed in the direction they came from and said, "Since we came to this floor, we have encountered more severe resistance than before, and the resistance in that direction is also the most stubborn. Obviously they are guarding something." The old wizard's eyes lit up. "Are you going to trade with them for what they are guarding?" Finny nodded and said, "Yes, and I am also very curious, what exactly are they guarding that requires so much blood?" The leading wizards among the crowd looked at each other and determined that Finny's plan was suitable. So, the army once again advanced towards the depths of the underground layer. This time, it was completely different from before. Not only were the resistance going there stubborn, but there were also powerful pursuers behind them. The further inside they go, the more people die, and the more severe the obstacles Finny and others encounter. At this time, the vampires who were blocking Finny's approach were also in a state of ignorance. They were originally just waiting here, waiting for the adults to come here with the thing called the treasure, and then use the magic weapon in the room behind them. It would be nice if things got out of here. As a result, it was suddenly discovered that the prisoners in the lower levels of the castle had escaped. It would be fine if they just escaped from prison. They could make door keys and leave here. However, those people's footsteps were directed towards the room behind them. This was not a jailbreak at all, but a planned attack. This is not okay. You must know that the room they are guarding behind is something that the clan leaders have constantly emphasized as extremely important. If these people destroy it, they will not only be punished, but also delay important events in the clan. According to the elders, as long as everything goes well and the things in the room behind them are activated normally, then they vampires can rely on the dark creatures and the encirclement and exclusion of wizards to become the masters of the world. Facing increasingly powerful enemies, the vampires had no choice but to send out a distress signal. Finally, when support was about to arrive, these people chose to retreat. They were about to successfully defend. Those enemies caught up and became more fierce, as if they would die if they didn't defeat them and destroy the future of the clan in the room behind them. If Finny or these vampires could know what the other party was thinking at this time, they would feel helpless, because this is simply a misunderstanding. Finny had always thought that the anti-apparition restrictions in the castle, such as door keys and other modes of transportation, were also prohibited, so he could only choose to break out upwards. The vampires didn't know that the items they were waiting for were hidden by Finny. They just thought that Finny was coming to destroy their hopes, so they resisted with all their strength. However, Finny took it as an act to prevent him and others from escaping here, and the battle became more and more fierce. Are these vampires crazy? Do they need so many lives just to catch us? The old wizard roared angrily, but the movements of his hands did not stop, and the killing curse continued to be fired. Finny shook his head helplessly and said, "Who knows, if we are all wizards, I can understand it, but there are only so many wizards here, and the rest are all muggles. Don't these vampires know how to settle the score? Use the lives of these vampires in exchange for the lives of muggles." As he spoke, a disarming spell knocked away the wand of a vampire who was preparing for a sneak attack. Mary casually fired a green light from the wand and made up for it. I always feel that we have overlooked something. The appearance of these vampires may not be because of our escape from prison, but because of what we are going to do now. The old wizard casually emitted 2 green lights and looked at Mary. You mean, they thought we would go to this place from the beginning, so they wanted to eliminate us so desperately? The old wizard was stunned when he asked this question, because if this is really the truth, then these people are really in trouble. Finny shook his head and said, "What are you thinking about so much now? Nothing can be changed anyway. All we can do is carve out a bloody path from them to the room in front." When Mary and the old wizard heard this, they glanced at the door that was just around the corner, nodded, and the movements of their hands became even colder. Perhaps it is because wizards instinctively look down on muggles. The only ones who are still standing and fighting vampires are wizards. Those muggles have long been used as shields by them to resist the killing curse and died. Unlike these wizards who have been using the killing curse, Finny has only used the killing curse twice since his escape from prison. Although I'm not sure what kind of hidden dangers this spell has, as a powerful combat magic, there must be some reasons why neither Dumbledore or Grindelwald in Finny's memory used it when fighting. Not to mention, what is needed to create a Horcrux is the killing caused by the killing curse. If this spell has no effect on the soul, Finny does not believe it at all. He used it before because he had to use it. Now, he cannot use it anymore. Therefore, Finny is significantly different from other wizards. Other wizards are full of green light, and the screen is full of green light, while Finny is casting disarming spells, cutting spells, and magic blades. Of course, the most commonly used one is Shenfeng Wuing. This black magic invented by Snape is completely different from other magics. Not only is its lethality astonishing, but its consequences are also non-renewable. There is no phenomenon when casting a spell, and it is extremely concealed. Because the effect is equally powerful, other wizards are not surprised that Finny did not use the killing curse. After all, maybe Finny is more proficient in using this self-invented spell. Yes, after Snape invented the Shadowless Blade, only a few people could master it, and he was the only one who could counter-curse it. It has never been announced. Nowadays, it is not surprising that these wizards see Finny using this spell and regard it as a spell invented by Finny himself. There are indeed not many people in the magic world who can develop powerful spells by themselves, but if they have the help of their elders, they can still invent a spell. Moreover, compared with the killing spell that can only lock a single attack method, Finny's God of Shadow is a spell that attacks in a small range. Every time he waves his wand, 2 or 3 vampires will be cut with wounds on their bodies, or even have their necks cut off. The unhealable effect of God of Shadow also makes the self-healing ability that vampires are proud of a joke. At the cost of losing several wizards, Finny and his team finally arrived at the door of the room. Now they only need to fight against the vampires chasing behind them. When seeing Finny and his team arrive at the door of this room, the vampires seemed to have their tails stepped on, and began to attack frantically without looking back, preventing them from trying to open the door. The more fierce the resistance of the vampires, the more they told Finny and his team how important the things in this room were. A wizard started to think of a way to open the door, while others started to resist the vampires. One wizard after another died because the bodies they used as shields were blasted by the spell. Finally, a passage was opened in the door of this room, and the wizard responsible for opening the door jumped into the world. He didn't want to stay outside and be blasted to death by those vampires' spells. The second person to enter was Finny. He had been paying attention to this door when he came to it. When he could enter, he watched the wizard jump in. After making sure that there was no danger inside, he ran directly in. There was absolutely no way he could do such a thing as staying outside and waiting to die. When they came to this room together, he saw a scene that destroyed most of his confidence. The wizard who came in before him was already slumped on the ground in despair, constantly mumbling about the impossibility. The old wizard and Mary also ran in and sealed the door. At this time, they were constantly applying reinforcement defensive magic to the door. Finny, have you found that item that the vampires value? Our ability to get out of here alive depends on it. After taking precautions, the old wizard shouted to Finny. After he finished shouting this sentence, he himself was stunned here. Because there is nothing in this room, no windows, no tables and chairs, no furniture, let alone any items valued by vampires. There are just mysterious patterns on the floor and wallpaper with the same pattern. Is there nothing here? Mary also saw this scene and asked tremblingly. Finny glanced at her, nodded with difficulty, and said, I misjudged the actions of those vampires. They might not be protecting something, but really wanted to kill us. His tone was very low, as if he had completely lost his fighting spirit. When the old wizard heard this, he collapsed on the ground in frustration. All the wizards present were like this. They were all disappointed, or desperate. At this time, there were so many vampires outside the room that they could no longer fight against them. And the only hope has now become a bubble. Such despair makes them lose their determination to continue fighting. The old wizard looked at everyone, sighed slightly, then stood up and said, Everyone, yes, we lost, and there is no possibility of a comeback. However, we cannot continue like this. Sooner or later, the door will be blasted open by the vampires. At that time, we will either be killed by them or be killed by them again. Catch them all at once and put them in a dungeon. Friends, I think everyone knows what we will face in the dungeon. Compared with it, death is a lucky thing, isn't it? Rather than being caught, I would rather die fighting like this. The old wizard's words obviously had some effect, or maybe everyone present knew exactly what would happen to them after they were caught, and knew that what the old wizard said was the truth, so they all stood up from the ground again. Holding the wand tightly, ready to go out and fight at any time, holding the belief that if you kill one, you will not pay, but if you kill 2, you will gain. Each one looked at the old wizard with red eyes, waiting for his order. When the old wizard saw this scene, he smiled and looked more like a dark wizard. He raised his wand and said to the door, Now, let's go out and fight those damn vampires to the death. Fight to the death. Following the words of the old wizard, the other wizards also raised their wands and shouted slogans of fight to the death, and rushed out of the room. Of course, Finny was not with them. Apart from Finny, the only one left in the room at this time was the old wizard. When he saw Finny who was not moving, he was also stunned. Then he smiled mysteriously and pointed the wand in his hand at Finny. You didn't go out. It seems that you recognize what this is. Hearing the old wizard's words, Finny smiled slightly and pointed the wand in his hand at the old wizard. Yes, I have studied ancient runes before. Although I don't know much about vampire runes, I happen to know what they are. The moment I saw this room full of runes, I got it clearly. The old wizard tightened the wand in his hand and smiled. It's a pity that even if you know it, you can't escape. This thing can only be used once, and it can only be used by one person at a time. Now, it belongs to me. Finny shook his head slightly and said, Really? That's not necessarily the case. The old wizard was very disdainful of Finny's words and said, You won't tell me that you still have a way to escape, right? Or do you think you are my opponent? Finny shook his head and said, Of course not, but, old gentleman, you don't think that after I recognized what this thing was, I collapsed on the ground in disappointment, do you? Or do you think that after I noticed what you meant, I was not prepared for anything? Don't do it. The old wizard was stunned for a moment. He pointed the wand in his hand at Finny and was about to cast a spell. However, Finny suddenly waved his wand. This made him subconsciously cast a killing curse. Unfortunately, to his surprise, the wand did not emit the killing curse, but instead broke in the middle. Finny sneered and said, "You don't think I took any precautions when I handed the wand to you, do you?" The old wizard stared blankly at the half-parted wand in his hand. "I'm curious, when did you start doubting me?" Finny smiled and said, "I didn't doubt you, I just didn't trust you, especially when I saw your necklace." The old wizard was stunned and looked down at the necklace hanging around his neck. It was a pattern composed of triangles, circles, and straight lines. "It seems that you recognize this symbol." Finny nodded. "Of course I know it, the symbol of the Deathly Hallows. The story of the three brothers in the tales of Beetle the Bard is very famous in the magic world. What's more, I know very well that the Deathly Hallows is not a legend, but a real existence. There was a group of people who ventured into the magic world with the purpose of finding the Deathly Hallows. Their names are they are saints. Among them, there are two powerful wizards who are still very famous today. They are the greatest white wizard today, Albus Dumbledore, and the first generation of Dark Lord, Gellert Grindelwald. Later, Grindelwald used the symbol and name of the saint as the name of his organization and followers. Today, the magic world believes that this symbol means Grindelwald, but has forgotten the earliest saint. With your age, old man, and the current situation of the magic world, I think you can't be a follower of Grindelwald. Then, there is only one possibility, you are a real saint, a saint who pursues the Deathly Hallows." The old wizard nodded and clapped his hands. "You are very smart, and you also know a lot of secrets in the magical world. This is not easy. However, even if I am a saint who is pursuing the Deathly Hallows, so what? Saints are not big and evil existences, and they deserve your special attention. Vigilant?" Finny nodded and said, "If you were a saint of Grindelwald, I wouldn't be so vigilant. However, you are a true saint. You must have explored the existence of many ruins and understood the secrets of the world. For such a person, no amount of precautions can count. Too much. Needless to say, I know very well who the true saints are. If you who try to control God are not careful, then I will face the possibility of dying at any time without knowing how." The old wizard shook his head disdainfully and said, "Even if you discover me and now make me lose the possibility of using this thing, can you activate it? You know, even I only learned how to activate this thing in a ruins." Finny shook his head and looked at the old wizard in front of him. "Okay, don't think about stalling for time until all the wizards are dead. The vampires have rushed in." At this time, Finny had noticed the wizards outside the door and couldn't resist them. He waved his wand lightly, and the head of the old wizard in front of him was completely separated from his body, the kind that would never come together until death. Finny glanced at the dead body of the old wizard and shook his head slightly. He still felt a little pity for this old guy. If he was not a saint, maybe he could be included in the power of the Black family. The necklace is flying. Finny summoned the old wizard's Deathly Hallows symbol necklace with a summoning spell. This is a good thing. You know, wearing a necklace like this doesn't mean you can say you are a saint. It is impossible to find out when and where saints first originated. However, if you really understand history, you will know that decades ago, before Grindelwald rose to power, he and Dumbledore were among the saints. Saints' necklaces are all alchemical items made by the original saints. Not only do they come with protective spells such as the Iron Armor Curse, but they can also sense death. Although this perception of death is just a statement in the book, Finny does not think that the necklace as the symbol of the saint needs a useless gimmick. Therefore, the function of sensing death may actually exist, but no one has discovered it in these years. Or maybe they found out and just didn't announce it. Finny put the necklace away and found that the vampires had begun to rush towards the room. He couldn't help but smile, walked to the center of the room, stuck the wand straight into the ground, and shouted. Tsen. This is the name of the sixth character in the runes. The popular meaning is a torch, but it also means igniting or activating. It is the key to activating the magic circle composed of various magic words. Of course, only wizards who truly understand the ancient magic texts and can use their power can do this and use the magic texts to forcefully activate the magic circle. Of course, Finny cannot use the power of runes. After all, he is only an 11-year-old wizard now. However, with the help of the Ravenclaw inheritance in his mind, he can still temporarily use the effect of a certain rune. Therefore, those vampires saw that the magic circle they had been protecting for many years and had not dared to use until now, just for the final purpose, was activated by the little wizard in front of them, and then disappeared in a burst of blood. The angry vampires disapparated and left here, preparing to take revenge on the wizards. After all, the ultimate goal of their plan was to dominate the wizards. Therefore, those who ruined their plans must be those pureblood wizards. Only they will be afraid of the rise of vampires. This is what the vampires think, but in fact, those pureblood wizards do not put vampires in their eyes. Even now, the reasons for internal fighting have exposed some of the hidden strengths of vampires. Families of pureblood wizards don't attach much importance to the power of vampires. Therefore, in fact, the vampires are just self-righteous. Of course, the pureblood wizards are also somewhat self-righteous. Both parties have their own trump cards, and both also look down upon the other. Back to Finny, after he activated this magic circle, he was directly teleported away from the castle, and all the muggles and wizards who tried to escape from prison with him were sleeping in this castle forever. Got it. As the vampires left, only dead bodies were left in the castle, which was what Dumbledore and the others saw when they arrived. Finny was teleported by the magic circle to an unknown place, at least a place he didn't know. This is a city, or a town, because it is really not big, and it only takes more than 2 hours to go around it. Finny was a little confused when he suddenly appeared in such a strange city. He didn't expect that the teleportation circle in the vampire's castle would actually send him to a muggle town. Hello, how can I get to London? Finny walked to the road in a daze. He would ask someone like this when he met someone. It was not enough. They seemed to not understand English and were at a loss about Finny's question. The answer was in a language that Finny didn't recognize. Finny, who didn't know what to do, had to find a corner and check the system that had been prompting since he escaped. You were kidnapped here for no reason and luckily escaped the enemy's cell, but it was only a small step to safely leave this dark and dangerous place. Facing an unknown number of enemies, you were alone and realized that you really needed help. Looking at the cells around you, a brilliant idea came to your mind. Mission: escape from the castle. The first stage is to rescue the people imprisoned by vampires. Rewards will be distributed after all tasks are completed. Completed. The second stage: break through the guards of the vampires and obtain enough weapons. Completed. The third stage: find out the secrets hidden by the vampires in the castle. Completed. The fourth stage: escape from the castle safely. Completed. The mission of escaping from the castle was successfully completed, and the reward was all the experience required for Animagus from entry to mastery, automatically reaching the mastery level after the first successful use. Animagus: this is the magic that Finny has always wanted to learn, but this magic requires the premise of advanced transfiguration, and there are very few books about Animagus in the Hogwarts library, which makes it very unlikely to draw this magic through the pass. However, now it's good. Finny got this magic directly through the task. Now he only needs to use it successfully once to master it. This time, the reward needs to be used successfully once to master it. Finny also understands it. After all, the magic of Animagus is different from other magic. It is too dangerous. There is no way to recover after the magic goes wrong. This is why the most famous hospital in the magic world, St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Injuries and Diseases, has set up a department to deal with the consequences of this spell. It is also very troublesome to become an Animagus. It may take several years to succeed. It can make people become the most suitable animal for themselves, but it is also possible to fail, so transformation also requires courage. Even now, there are only 7 Animagus recorded by the Ministry of Magic. Practicing Animagus requires a single leaf of mandrake to be kept in the mouth for a whole month, from full moon to full moon. The leaf cannot be swallowed or taken out of the mouth at any time. If the leaf leaves the mouth, the whole process must be restarted. And this is just the first step. Then you need to take the leaf out when the moon is full, fill a crystal vial with saliva, and soak the leaf in it, letting it receive pure moonlight. If it is cloudy that night, you will have to find a new mandrake leaf and start over. Add a strand of your hair and a silver teaspoon of dew, which must have been collected from a place without sunlight or human contact for 7 full days, to the moonlit crystal vial. Finally, add a pupa of a grimace moth. Keep this mixture in a quiet, dark place, and do not look at or disturb it until the next thunderstorm. The preparations are now complete, and then comes the practice of Animagus. The following actions should be performed every sunrise and sunset. Point the tip of the wand to the heart and chant the spell: Amato, Animato, Animagus, Animagus. Until you continue to chant the spell repeatedly at sunrise and sunset, there will be a moment when the tip of the wand touches your chest and you will feel a second heartbeat, sometimes stronger than the original heartbeat, sometimes weaker. This is the beginning. After that, you need to refine the potion, which is the potion composed of saliva, mandrake leaves and other substances prepared in advance. At the moment when lightning breaks through the sky, immediately go to the place where you buried the crystal vial. If you complete all the above steps correctly, you will find a mouthful of blood-red potion inside. After that, you need to immediately set off to a large and safe place to ensure that the transformation process will not attract attention or put your body in danger. Point the tip of your wand to your heart and chant the spell, Amato, Animato, Animagus, Animagus, and then drink the potion. If everything goes well, you will feel intense pain and 2 intense heartbeats. The creature you are about to transform into will appear in your mind. You must show no fear, it is too late to escape the change you promised. This is only half done, until you adapt to the transformed creature and clearly imagine your human form to successfully return to human form. It is considered successful, and then you just need to practice continuously until you can switch between animal and human forms at will. So, Finny would be so excited to get the Animagus reward for a task, and this reward saved him a lot of things and troubles. Of course, what he needs at this time is not to be excited about this reward, nor to find a place to practice this spell, but to find a way to return to London. Only when he returns to London can he return to the house at number 12, Grimmauld Place, and then let the elf take him back to Hogwarts. Hello, how do I get to London? Finny grabbed a person on the side of the road and asked again. Luckily, the person Finny caught this time knew English. London? You need to take a plane, or you can take a train, so you can experience the beautiful scenery of the Soviet Union. Hearing this, Finny was stunned at first, and then asked. Is this the Soviet Union? The passerby was obviously confused by Finny's question. There was actually someone who didn't know where he was. Looking at the passerby in front of him who looked at him like a madman, Finny said helplessly. I don't know how I got here. I woke up here after sleeping in London. Finny's words, coupled with his current age, obviously gave passers-by the illusion that he was kidnapped. Oh, that's it, poor child, yes, this is a small county town in the Kaliningrad region of the Soviet Union. Although I don't know how you got here, if you want to go back to London, you need to go to the city and buy a plane or train ticket. Finny nodded, indicating that he understood. However, it would be impossible to return to London according to the Muggle method of this passerby. You know, Finny did not come here through the normal channels of wizards or Muggles. He was smuggled here and there was no way to return to London legally. So, what he needed was to find a way to contact the professors of Hogwarts or the elves at home. This requires an owl. And if you want an owl, you need to find a gathering place or hiding place for wizards. Through the confusion spell, Finny came to the city of Kaliningrad, and what he didn't expect the most was that the wizard shop here was so openly displayed in the open. After asking, Finny learned that the magic world in the Soviet Union was also hidden in the Muggle world. However, they were different from other countries. Their hiding meant putting it in the open, which made it look like a wonderful store selling strange things. In addition, the high price reduced a lot of trouble. This country is one of the few countries where wizards need to follow the Muggle way to rank their status. The entire European magic world uses gold galleons, which saves Finny a lot of trouble. After buying an owl, Finny sent a letter to Dumbledore, stating his current situation and location, and looking forward to Dumbledore coming to rescue him. The reason why he gave it to Dumbledore instead of Professor McGonagall was because he knew that it was the best choice for him to return to Hogwarts secretly, and only Dumbledore's Phoenix could take him back without alerting the Ministry of Magic. After sending the letter via owl, Finny found a place to wait quietly. He believed that as long as Dumbledore received the letter, he would come to pick him up. After all, he was still a little wizard in Hogwarts. At this time in Hogwarts, Professor McGonagall was still angry that Dumbledore and the others failed to find Finny. Albus! You guys came right back like this. Professor McGonagall was like a raging lion now, looking at the 4 people in front of him angrily. Snape's face was expressionless, as if Professor McGonagall's angry words were completely indifferent to him. Of course, this was under the premise of ignoring the twitching corners of his mouth. The target stood there a little embarrassed, with the magic eye on his left eye spinning, not knowing what he was thinking. Arthur was very sad and felt guilty for not saving the child who had saved his 2 sons. Dumbledore, on the other hand, had wandering eyes and did not dare to look directly at Professor McGonagall. Albus! I'm talking to you. Professor McGonagall yelled even more angrily when she saw that Dumbledore was not looking directly at her. Dumbledore was yelled at by Professor McGonagall and had no choice but to say, "Calm down, Minerva, Trust me, Mr. Black is not in danger now. Professor McGonagall was like a cat whose hair had exploded and was on fire. Is there no danger now? Calm down. That is a young wizard, a student. He is not an adult wizard from the Order of the Phoenix, let alone your warrior, Dumbledore. Sure enough, an angry cat lady is something you cannot mess with, especially an older cat lady. Just when Dumbledore didn't know how to stabilize Professor McGonagall, an owl flew over. It was a hairy-legged fishing owl, the largest owl in the world. The length of an adult hairy-legged fishing owl ranges from 67 to 77 centimeters. It is only possible to appear in East Asia, and it is still an extremely rare species. That was exactly the owl that Finny bought in the Soviet Union to deliver messages to Dumbledore. Only in the wizarding world of the Soviet Union, which spans 2 continents and has many constituent countries, can such a rare cross-region owl be purchased. Breed owl bar. Finny didn't buy this owl with the intention of using it just once, so naturally he had to choose a better one. Well, it seems that our Mr. Black is out of trouble. He wrote a letter asking me to pick him up. Dumbledore handed the letter on the owl's feet that he had read to Professor McGonagall, and said with a smile. Professor McGonagall read the letter he was hesitant about. After a moment, she said in surprise. How is this possible? He is in the Soviet Union. Dumbledore shrugged and said. I'll let Mr. Black explain this. I think he must have a very rich adventure experience. Fox, please go and pick up our Mr. Black. Fox, the phoenix beside Dumbledore, nodded, and then disappeared in a flash of fire. Only Phoenix can do this kind of cross-border transfer, oh, so can Zhuowu from China. A few minutes later, the fire appeared in the principal's office again, and it was Fox who took Finny back to Hogwarts. Looking at the changing scene in front of him and the professor standing there, Finny took a deep breath and fell to the ground. More than 10 hours have passed since he chose to escape, and there was still continuous spellcasting and fighting in between. This is Finny. If it were any other little wizard, his magic power would have been exhausted a long time ago. Even Finny, whose magic value is close to that of an adult, is in danger of being depleted at this time. After the tension passed, he came to an environment that made him feel relieved. Physical and mental fatigue, as well as the impending exhaustion of magic power, caused him to pass out directly. Dumbledore frowned and said. It seems that our little Mr. Black needs a good rest. Minerva, can you take him to the infirmary? Madame Pomfrey will have a potion that can help him. Professor McGonagall nodded, waved her wand at Finny, and cast a floating spell. Let Finny float behind her and leave the principal's office. After watching Professor McGonagall take Finny away from here, Snape looked at Dumbledore and said. Dumbledore, that kid is definitely not simple. How did he escape from the castle and even activate the magic circle? Dumbledore nodded and waved his wand. The wand he bought from the mall flew directly to his hand on the ground where Finny appeared. He lowered his head and examined the wand carefully, and after a moment he said. This is not the wand he bought at Ollivander's. Although the material is the same, it is indeed not the same wand. Flashback curse. As he spoke, Dumbledore cast a flashback spell. Well, the killing curse, the imperious curse, the disarming curse, the stunning curse, the shadowless curse. Severus, did you teach him this? Snape's expression was not very good. Every time Dumbledore said a curse, his expression became uglier. When the curses like Shenfone wooing appeared, his expression was already ugly. To the extreme. Not at all. Snape looked ugly. After saying this word this time, he stopped talking. At this time, he not only looked ugly, but also seemed to be in a bad mood. Moody frowned and said. Dumbledore, this child used the unforgivable curse. We are not sure whether he used it on vampires or humans. It is even illegal to use it on vampires. Hearing this, Arthur looked at Dumbledore with some embarrassment. Dumbledore, he is trying to protect himself. Dumbledore waved his hand to interrupt Arthur's words. I know, Arthur, don't worry, we won't let him go to Azkaban. I don't think the Ministry of Magic would believe that an underage wizard could master the unforgivable curse. After all, he picked up this wand, not his own. After hearing Dumbledore's words, Arthur's tangled face calmed down. Moody's expression changed and he nodded. You are right, Albus, he is just a little wizard. Moody's words meant that he would not use the unforgivable curse in Tiffany. After all, the minister who just resigned once advocated that the unforgivable curse could be used when facing dangerous elements such as Death Eaters. Only Snape's face was still ugly. Dumbledore, I think you need to understand that I have not taught Black that spell. In fact, there are only a handful of people in the wizarding world who can cast this spell now. Dumbledore was stunned and asked. So, who are you sure knows this spell now? You, the two of us, and Lucius. Dumbledore's eyes changed, and he looked at Snape deeply. How could he not understand what Snape meant? If the spell was not taught to Finny by the two of them, then it must have been taught by Lucius, and everyone knew that Lucius was the right-hand man of the mysterious man. In this case, one has to doubt whether Finny has any relationship with the mysterious man. As Snape said this, the scene was quiet. A day later, Finny woke up again. Looking at the unfamiliar environment in front of him, he looked around vigilantly. He was sure that this was a ward. He was lying on a bed covered with white sheets. Next to the bed was a table with a toilet seat on it, but it was smaller than normal, and it smelled like chocolate. Finny, who knew the original work, was sure that this must be the masterpiece of the Weasley twins. Also, since he was in the hospital, only these brothers could give him a gift. Looking at the empty ward and the white ceiling, Finny blinked his eyes. Puff. He called out tentatively. He realized in a dungeon that when he was attacked, Puff did not appear and must have been entangled by vampires. Now, he was not sure whether the elf who was responsible for taking care of his daily life and protecting his safety survived. Pa. As Finny's voice fell, a small, pitiful, aggrieved, tearful creature appeared beside his bed. Master. It's Puff's fault that the master was hurt, bad Puff. He was about to hit his head against the wall. Finny found that Puff's body was full of scars, burns, cuts, and bruises. Obviously, Puff felt very guilty when he was attacked and kidnapped, and could only relieve it by punishing himself. Okay, Puff, I order you not to punish yourself. Puff could not disobey Finny's order, so she had to look at Finny aggrievedly again. The young master is so kind to Puff. Finny waved his hand and said. Puff, go home and get a few elves from the defense team to follow you in case something like this happens again. Puff nodded and was about to leave and an old and kind voice came over. Finny, I don't think you need to prepare so many security forces in Hogwarts. Professor Dumbledore. Finny looked at the person who came and said. Puff, you go down first, I will call you if there is anything. Puff obeyed the order and disappeared from the spot with a snap. And Dumbledore walked to Finny's side with a smile. Fred and George gave you a toilet seat, but Madame Pomfrey thought it was not very hygienic, so she confiscated it, so they made a chocolate toilet seat. Finny nodded and said. They are the only ones who give me gifts, so, Professor, how long have I been here? One day, you fainted after you came back the day before yesterday, you were unconscious all day yesterday, and Arthur also came to see you. I've been to you for a while. Oh, you know Arthur, right? Finny nodded. Yes, I know, Arthur Weasley, a very talented wizard. Dumbledore nodded and said. Although Madame Pomfrey repeatedly emphasized that I should wait until you are fully recovered before asking you, but I think it's better to ask first. What do you think? Finny nodded. I think so too, and, sir, can you prepare some food for me? I only have that chocolate here, well, not to mention that I can't eat this thing now, even if I can eat it, I can't eat it in this shape. Dumbledore nodded, waved his wand, and a tray with various snacks appeared in front of Finny. Finny picked up a cookie and took a bite and asked. So, what do you want to know, Professor? A lot. Tell me your judgment first. Why did those vampires capture you? Finny shrugged and said. Well, Professor, do you know that there is a mysterious room on the 8th floor of the castle? Dumbledore nodded. I have heard of it. I hid something in there. It was given to me by Professor Jonathan before he left. I think that's what those vampires want. You don't know what it is? Finny shook his head and said. Before Professor Jonathan left, he said that it was his blood inheritance and used to create offspring. However, I think he may have deceived me. Otherwise, those vampires would not be interested in the blood of a person who creates offspring. Dumbledore nodded and said. That thing is Cain's blood. There are some ways to summon Cain back to life through that blood. Cain. Is it the legendary ancestor of vampires? Or what? Dumbledore nodded with satisfaction, looked at Finny with admiration, and said. You are really smart and sensitive. This Cain is a wizard who is older than Gryffindor and has some connection with the despicable Herpo. The vampire clan was also created by him. Hearing this, Finny didn't care about eating biscuits, stood up and looked at Dumbledore, and asked. He created it. What do you mean? Dumbledore said. Vampires are not magical animals, I think you know, they are more like a blood curse. Well, do you know the blood curse? Finny nodded. Understand a little more. The blood curse is a type of blood curse. It is transmitted through the maternal bloodline. In the early days, the cursed person could freely transform between human form and animal form, just like Animagus. However, the difference is that they will eventually become beasts and never be able to return to their human form. It is said that their intelligence will be suppressed by the beast's soul and they will lose their mind. Dumbledore nodded and said, I once had a friend who was cursed with blood. At that time, we tried to help her uncover the curse, but to no avail. In the end, we could only watch her turn into a beast and lose her mind. So Professor, what does the blood curse have to do with vampires when you mentioned it? Dumbledore said. Vampires first appeared because of the blood curse. However, the wizard who cast the blood curse on them, that is, the creature Cain cursed them, was a non-existent creature that could only survive on blood. In the end, the current vampire family just appeared. I don't think even Cain himself thought of it. Finny frowned and said. But, that's not right, Professor, even in the history of the wizarding world, Cain is described as a vampire. Dumbledore nodded and said. He is indeed a vampire. It is said that after he found out that his curse turned into this, he cast the curse on himself and turned himself into a vampire. So, what are the vampires trying to resurrect him for? Finny was still very confused. Dumbledore shook his head and said. The vampires did not want to resurrect him. They wanted to use his blood to release the restrictions of the curse on them, the restrictions that low-level vampires cannot cast spells. Hearing this, Finny understood. The main reason why vampires are not valued by wizards is that the number of spells they can cast is too small. High-level vampires cannot be transformed through ordinary transformation methods, which makes the number of wizards among them extremely rare. This is why Finny and the others were confused when they saw many vampires who could cast spells chasing them. And in this way, it can be explained that the vampires came to Hogwarts to kidnap him at the expense of many high-level vampires. So, the magic circle I passed through was actually for breaking the curse, not for teleportation. Finny was still a little confused, thinking this in his mind. Dumbledore continued. We found the castle where you were imprisoned, and went in and saw the teleportation circle that was used. Although we don't know how you activated it, that is the ritual circle prepared by the vampires. This also explains why the vampires risked their lives to prevent Finny and the others from entering that room. So, can you tell me how you activated that magic circle? Dumbledore looked into Finny's eyes and asked. Finny sighed helplessly, raised his right hand, and revealed the ring on his little finger. Because this. He didn't say it clearly. At the same time, he also believed that Dumbledore understood what he meant without him having to say it clearly, because he was now sure that Dumbledore also had such a ring on his hand. Ravenclaw's ring, that's it. Then, Finny, I still have a doubt. Ask, Professor. Where did you learn Shinfeng wooing? Lucius taught you. When Finny heard this question, he immediately realized that his wand was in Badow's hand, and he also cast a flashback spell, otherwise he would not have known that he had used Snape's exclusive spell. And I should have asked Snape, otherwise Lucius would not have been mentioned. Lucius didn't give it to me, Professor. I learned this spell myself. I saw it in a 6th grade potions textbook in the cabinet of the potions classroom. The owner of that book is called Half-Blood Prince. Dumbledore took a deep look at Finny, but still endured the thought of legitimacy. I'll check it out. Finny nodded and said. Professor, believe me, I will not be your enemy. Oh, by the way, if you go to find the bottle of blood, I have hidden it in the alchemy laboratory of Ravenclaw. You can still try to find it. Check out the hidden room, there are surprises there. Dumbledore was stunned for a moment, looked at Finny, and didn't know what he was thinking. After a moment, he nodded and said. Okay, I'll go back and try. After saying that, she turned around and left the ward. Then, Madame Pomfrey walked in and shouted angrily. Who told you to eat biscuits? You are physically unable to eat these things now, are you Dumbledore? Finny nodded blankly and saw Madame Pomfrey roaring and walking out. Dumbledore. Seeing this, he couldn't help but tremble in his heart. This Madame Pomfrey is really not simple. At least it is an existence that cannot be messed with. It took 2 days for Finny to leave the infirmary. In fact, it seemed to him that he could leave the next day after he woke up. However, Madame Pomfrey kept him for another day for no reason, and allowed him to leave only after checking his body to make sure everything was fine. Because Finny saved the Weasley brothers, his situation at Hogwarts was much better, except that it was still the same in Slytherin. However, after more than half a year, Finny has become accustomed to Slytherin's little snake. Their attitude towards him. What makes Finny feel the most uncomfortable is actually that he was kidnapped this time. It's already mid-February when he comes back, and he missed half a month of classes. It's not that he felt bad because he missed the class, but because if he missed the class, there would be no extra points, and if there was no way to add points, he wouldn't be able to open the academy treasure chest. If you can't open the academy chest, you can't get the library pass. Without the pass, there will be no new magic. Finny. Are you okay? Two similar voices came from behind Finny, the twins George and Fred. Well, I'm fine. Why are you here? If I remember correctly, you have classes at this time. Finny looked at the two of them and said. After hearing Finny's words, both of them looked a little ugly. Oh, don't. Don't be like Percy. You shouldn't skip class. You are bringing disgrace to Gryffindor. It's an embarrassment to the Weasley family. I will tell Mom if you are not honest. As always, one sentence per person, if one person is talking. Finny shook his head and said. So, you guys skipped class, right? Hey man, you're not telling Percy. Or tell our mother. Finny shook his head, put an arm across a Weasley, and said. Of course not, but I'm curious, how did you manage to deliver a toilet seat to a patient, and it's made of chocolate? Don't you know that it's disgusting and totally inedible? Hearing Finny's words, George and Fred were stunned. Oh my god. You don't want to eat that toilet seat, do you? You're better than us. That's a real toilet seat. It's just covered with a layer of chocolate. If you eat it, then please stay away from us. The two's words really made Finny sick. You know, he almost ate that toilet seat before, but in the end he didn't eat it because the shape was too disgusting, otherwise. Thinking of this, he shuddered, and at the same time, he suddenly felt a little sympathy for the brothers' younger brother Ron. When the brothers were at home, they didn't know how to tease the poor child. Let's not talk too much. I'm going to the hall for dinner. Together? Fred heard this and said exaggeratedly. You actually invited us to the hall together? George was also surprised and said. You, a Slytherin, and two Gryffindors are going to the hall together. Then the two said in unison. Oh my god, that's really great. We can't wait to see those people's surprised expressions. In fact, the three people did cause some sensation when they entered the auditorium. However, the sensation was not caused by the fact that Slytherin and Gryffindor entered the auditorium together and had a very close relationship. It was caused by Finny's return. Most of the wizarding world now knows that Finny was kidnapped, let alone being in the same school as Hogwarts. A reporter from the Daily Prophet even said that Finny had been killed, but some people just covered up the fact. The Quibbler claims that Finny was not kidnapped, but simply disappeared in a planned way to do something against the Ministry of Magic behind the scenes. In short, no one thought that Finny could come back so easily, not to mention that the situation between vampires and wizards is now so tense. The situation of vampires revolting against wizards has been formed, and they are just short of a good breaking point. Obviously, Phineas Black, the heir to the Black family and temporary family manager, is a good breaking point. As long as Finny dies, then the wizard will have a reason to suppress the vampire, and similarly, the vampire will have a legitimate reason to rebel against the wizard. The reason why the two parties are still anxious at this time that no one takes the lead is just to have a logical and reasonable reason that allows them to win over other races as allies. Most smart little eagles can think of this. The politically sensitive little snakes also know this very well, not to mention that they originally hoped that Finny would not come back this time. Not only would there be one less person in the school who they dislike, but also the purebloods would be avoided. Negative press about wizards killing other family members for profit. The Little Lions had a great change in their view of Finny because he protected the Weasley twins before being kidnapped, and even warmly applauded his return. As for the Little Badgers, they were busy working and didn't bother to care whether Finny had returned. After all, Finny's return did not cause any sensation or commotion. Everything went as usual, and life at Hogwarts continued to be peaceful. However, after this incident, some figures occasionally appeared around Finny. The Weasley twins, who like to prank, and their roommate, Lee Jordan, who is as naughty as they are an eloquent black boy who likes Quidditch. Some Hufflepuff students who were neither repulsive nor close to him have now become friendly. In Hufflepuff, loyalty is their greatest characteristic, and Finny's behavior in protecting the Weasley twins is obviously loyalty to his friends and in line with their values. In this way, in Finny's daily study in life, the days gradually passed. Of course, Finny has been studying the inheritance of the ancient magic texts of Ravenclaw in his mind. As for the inheritance of Gryffindor and Hufflepuff, he has not found any clues. Since Easter, the school professors have invariably begun to put more burdens on the little wizards to prepare for the exams at the end of the school year. Finny also felt the pressure from this heavy coursework and had to spend a lot of time to complete the homework assigned by the professors, so that the Animagus he had been preparing for has not been completed yet. In Finny's impression, the Weasley twins were always playing pranks, so their grades shouldn't be good. As a result, after reviewing together, Finny discovered that the grades of these two people were actually on the same level as his. Time gradually came to the beginning of June, and the school's final exams also started in the first week of June. The entire examination process takes 1 week to complete. The written examination will begin at 9:30 on Monday morning. The first subject is charms taught by Professor Flitwick. Students will sit in their seats according to their respective numbers and take the written examination. It is worth mentioning that the written examination for wizards and muggles, the written exam is the same, and the professor who invigilates the exam is Professor McGonagall. Professor McGonagall's stern expression and sharp eyes immediately doubled the pressure on the little wizards. Of course, Finny doesn't care about this. The strongest wizard system gives him not only the level and proficiency of using magic spells, but also the corresponding basic knowledge, and even the basic principles of magic spells that are not taught in schools are deeper. There are also basic things at the level. Therefore, the first grade written examination was extremely easy for him, not to mention that he also reviewed carefully before the examination. In order to prevent cheating, quills, ink bottles and parchments specially used for exams will be placed on the exam table. These things are not only cast with magic spells to prevent cheating, but also prevent little wizards from cheating with things like automatic answering quills. Before the exam, Professor McGonagall will use a special device to scan everyone's bodies to prevent anyone from taking magic potions such as Buffy's brain refresher. It can be said that the professors at Hogwarts have worked hard to prevent cheating. Of course, this does not mean that there is no way to cheat. It is also possible to cheat simply by using magic power. However, wizards who can do this obviously do not need to cheat. As the huge hourglass on the table was turned upside down by Professor McGonagall, the exam officially began. What kind of magic spell is the spell? Repair as before. A. Levitation spell. B. Lockpicking spell. C. Repair spell. D. Fire-making spell. Please write down the incantation of the fire spell and briefly describe the wand movements. The whole paper is full of similar questions. As long as you listen carefully in class and understand part of the spellcasting principle, you can get a high score. Although the test time is 1 hour, for Finny, who has begun to master the essence of magic spells, it does not take so long. Of course, compared with Finny, many young wizards are not so smooth. Ravenclaw's young wizards do have more advantages than wizards from other colleges in these knowledge levels. The quills in their hands are constantly answering questions on parchment without any stuck. Hufflepuff is second only to Ravenclaw. However, compared with it, Slytherin, who is more keen on power and has many internal marriage defects, and Gryffindor, who is brainless and reckless and whose body is always faster than his brain, are not so easy. Many wizards from snake and lion houses are a little irritable, crossing out the answers on the parchment from time to time, biting the quills and frowning, struggling with how to answer. There will be a written test in the morning, and a practical test on spells in the afternoon. Compared to the written test in the morning, which is more focused on basics and research, the direct hands-on test in the afternoon is much easier. Many young wizards do not understand why spells are cast in this way and why they are effective. They just want to know how to cast them. Therefore, compared with written tests, practical tests are simpler. Unlike written tests, practical tests are naturally supervised by Professor Flitwick himself. He calls them into the classroom one by one according to the alphabetical order of their surnames. As a member of the Black family, Finny is naturally one of the top few. The first-year spell test is very simple, which is the proficiency of spells and the control of magic. After entering the classroom, you need to draw a spell inspection project from Professor Flitwick. Finny is unlucky and draws a more difficult project, which is to make a pineapple dance across a desk. This project requires a high level of mastery and control of spells. However, Finny has already mastered the spells that need to be used. Although he still cannot cast spells without a wand, he can cast spells silently. With the waving of Finny's wand, it is easily completed. The subject of the second day was Transfiguration. The written test was the same as the charms class, but the examination on the principle of Transfiguration was more in-depth. For Finny, it was still easy. The practical test was to transform a mouse into a snuff bottle. The more exquisite the snuff bottle, the higher the score. Finny, who had already started preparing for the Animagus, naturally passed the test easily. He transformed the mouse into a glazed snuff bottle with a Hogwarts relief on it. This also made Professor McGonagall amazed, and she said that it was the right thing to invite Finny to join her Transfiguration club. The exam in the potions class was more difficult for Finny, of course, only relatively speaking. After all, he had the experience of the college entrance examination in his previous life. He could complete a complex experiment like chemistry by himself. Now, this potion brewing, which did not even accurately specify the quantity, could be completely achieved with enough basics. Moreover, as a member of Slytherin, Snape would instinctively be partial to him and almost never appeared behind Finny. You know, Snape's favorite thing to do as an invigilator is to suddenly appear behind a little wizard and then watch their operations affectionately. This is completely giving those little wizards a state of reduced intelligence. It is normal for their heartbeats to accelerate and their hands to be in a hurry. Compared with Snape's death stare, Professor Sprout's herbology exam is completely heaven. It is small in size and easy to review. The content of the exam is almost the knowledge points she reviewed with the little wizards in her last class, and the order has not changed. He is worthy of being the kind-hearted head of Hufflepuff. The defense against the dark arts class was cancelled because of the departure of Professor Jonathan and the fact that Professor Dumbledore was too busy. Of course, Finny thought that Dumbledore was just too lazy to take the exam. Astronomy is to draw a galaxy map of the solar system. It is simple and completely useless. As long as you buy a simulated star map of the magic world and memorize it seriously, this exam is completely a gift. As the last exam, the history of magic has no practicals, only written exams, and the content of the written exam is also the most difficult of all the subjects. The large amount of historical content in the boring and almost unchanging class of Professor Binns, the professor of the history of magic, can be said to have made this already difficult course even more difficult. Finny really tried to memorize those important knowledge points before the exam. Which weird old wizards invented the automatic stirring crucible? The code of conduct for werewolves, the deeds of the weird Uric, these kinds of questions still made Finny's head big. Fortunately, all this is over. When Professor Binns announced that everyone put down their quills, unprecedented cheers broke out in the classroom. At this moment, the little wizards from all the colleges were excited, spinning and jumping. The exam is over, and the little wizards are finally free. They can play easily for a week, waiting for the announcement of the exam results next week, and then they can pack their bags and prepare to go home to spend a vacation that lasted more than 2 months and 9 weeks. The last match of the Quidditch Cup was held 1 day later. Contrary to Finny's previous judgment, this match was not between Gryffindor and Slytherin, but between Slytherin and Hufflepuff. After Slytherin's crushing victory, it won the final Quidditch trophy. In the current school, the Quidditch teams of the 3 colleges except Slytherin are indeed much weaker, especially when the old and the new are handed over and there is a talent gap. However, Finny knew very well that this was only temporary, because in the next school year, their class of young wizards could join the Quidditch competition. The Weasley twins of Gryffindor, Angelina Johnson, Cedric Diggory of Hufflepuff, and Roger Davis of Ravenclaw were all very talented wizards in Quidditch. Not to mention, there will be 2 talented seekers, Cho Zhang and Harry Potter, who entered the school when they were in the 3rd grade, who will enter the school next year. The era when Slytherin dominated the Quidditch field is finally over. Not only that, Slytherin dominated the House Cup in the past 2 years, and then in a few years after Harry Potter entered school, the House Cup belonged to Gryffindor House. Finny didn't care much about these things. This week's free time was a very suitable time for him. Although it was not like the beginning of the school year when he had no friends, the Gryffindors naturally could not come to the Slytherin common room to find him, although he was not in the Slytherin common room at this time but in the room of requirement. These days, he stayed here, preparing for the first use of the magic of Animagus. Unlike others, there was a system reward. All Finny had to do was to complete a complete transformation, from human to beast, and then from beast back. Animagus, like the Patronus charm, is a spell that reflects the inner state of the wizard, so many people's Animagus form is the same as the Patronus, but the Patronus can be changed, while the Animagus form cannot be changed. Under the lightning weather created by the room of requirement, Finny poured the prepared potion into his mouth and placed the wand that he had bought from the system in the castle before against his heart. Because he had no chance to go to Diagon Alley and Dumbledore believed that this wand was snatched by Finny, he did not reject Finny's use and temporarily gave it to him. Whisper the incantation. Amato, Animo, Animato, Animagus. As Finny finished reciting the spell, he clearly felt a sharp pain, and there were 2 very obvious heartbeats in his chest, and his mind went blank. With the severe pain in his body, Finny felt that everything around him was getting bigger. No, he was actually getting smaller. Hair appeared on the surface of his body, his hands turned into claws, and the wand fell to the ground due to the change in his palms. Finally, when the pain completely stopped, everything around him had become extremely tall, and Finny had turned into a mammal lying on all 4s. Looking at the furry hands, the plum blossom-shaped claws, and the long tail behind him, Finny had some preliminary ideas about his Animagus form. However, this can only be confirmed after looking in the mirror. He moved his limbs and came to the mirror prepared in advance. I saw a black cat that looked very similar to Chocolate appearing in the mirror. The lynching lion cat is Finny's Animagus form, which is somewhat beyond his initial expectations. As a member of the Black family, the Animagus form is more normal, at least in the family. According to internal records, the Animagus forms of the Black family members are almost all canine, most of them are dogs, and some powerful people are wolves. Although the breeds are different, they are all dogs. When we arrived at Finny, the canine family turned into a cat family. If this matter were revealed to the reclusive elders of the family, they would not know how to laugh at Finny. The first Animagus transformation requires a lot of magic power. Adult wizards are unable to have enough magic power to transform back immediately after completing the transformation for the first time, and Finny is no exception. After a semester of growth, Finny's magic value is now 350 points, which is very close to the 500 for an adult wizard. However, an Animagus transformation still completely cleared his magic value. In other words, this is the room of requirement, which is very safe, otherwise Finny would have to return to the house in Grimmauld Place to use this magic. He curled up into a small ball and closed his eyes slightly. After a while, a slight snoring sound came from the mouth of the kitten that Finny had transformed into, resounding throughout the room of requirement. The night passed so peacefully. The next morning, Finny woke up from the ground in the form of Animagus. He subconsciously stretched his body, and the raised tail reminded him that he was still a cat at this time. After feeling it for a while, the magic power in my body had almost recovered at this time, so I began to imagine what I looked like as a human in my mind, as clearly as possible. The severe pain in my body appeared again, even more severe than the time when I turned into a cat. Finny felt that his body was constantly being torn and restored. His whole body was slowly getting bigger due to the constant pulling, and everything around him also returned to its original size. And Finny had just returned to human form for the first time. The severe pain before and the magic power that the Animagus needed to consume for the first time made Finny feel exhausted. He had just woken up and could no longer open his eyes. However, fortunately, after completing the transformation of Animagus, all the rewards from the previous system were distributed at once. A large amount of experience was added to the entire magic of Animagus, directly increasing it to the level of proficiency. This allows Finny to use the Animagus as soon as he thinks about it, and vice versa. Even if Professor McGonagall uses Animagus at this time, she still needs to imagine what her Animagus looks like before she can use it, while Finny only needs to think about how I want to use Animagus. And the magic power consumed is also lower. You only need to consume the magic power to transform the body. This is the power of the spell mastery level. If you change it to ordinary spells, it would be a level where you can cast spells without a wand, without sound, or even with just a thought. With the distribution of system rewards, the magic power that Finny had consumed gradually recovered. After resting for a while in the room of requirement, he began to study the notes in the Ravenclaw Chamber of Secrets. This is the most valuable knowledge he has gained now. After all, these things will not only open the door to ancient magic for Finny, but also allow him to learn about alchemy, a magic that has almost no information in Hogwarts. Branch. Everything is calm, the holidays are approaching, and all the little wizards don't want to cause trouble at this time. 2 days later, the results came out. To Finny's surprise, he was second in age. The one before him was not a little wizard from Ravenclaw, but a little badger, Cedric Diggory. Moreover, the Weasley twins' grades were also among the top, which was not only beyond Finny's expectation, but also beyond Professor McGonagall's expectation. You must know that although the twin brothers are very talented in class, they are too naughty. I don't know how to study seriously at all. Who would have thought that this kind of student who doesn't study at all and just plays around would be a top student? George and Fred are not doing any involution. These two people really did this based on their own talents. It's not that difficult to understand if you think about it carefully. The 5 Weasleys who have entered Hogwarts are all very talented. Bill Weasley is very talented in charms and potions, and he has also taught himself the alchemy inherited from his family. He is now a curse breaker at Gringotts. The so-called curse breaker is not a safe position. They have to adventure around the world, explore ancient ruins to find treasures, and remove the curses, spells, and various seals on them. Then hand them over to Gringotts and get rewards. Charlie Weasley is very talented in magical animals and transfiguration. Now he raises fire dragons in Romania. This is not a job that ordinary wizards can do. It requires a very strong and good transfiguration. Percy Weasley, who is still in school, is also a talented little wizard. He is not only a member of the Transfiguration Club, but also a member of the Charms Club. His grades are also very good. If nothing unexpected happens, he will become the head of Gryffindor in the 5th grade. Although the Weasley twins are a little naughty, the two have been able to develop some joke products at this time, and even applied some simple alchemy knowledge, which is enough to show how superb their talent in alchemy is. So it is understandable that they can achieve such good results. On the day of the year-end dinner, the auditorium was carefully decorated with Slytherin green and silver colors. Because the next day was an official holiday, the entire auditorium was filled with excitement and joy. The Slytherin students were like proud peacocks, raising their heads and chests high, thinking of the Gryffindor students next door showing off their 5th consecutive house cup. The atmosphere among Gryffindor students was a bit gloomy. In their opinion, even if Hufflepuff or Ravenclaw won the house cup, it would be better than Slytherin. You know, before this year, Slytherin had won the house cup for 4 consecutive years. This year is the 5th year. The consecutive wins have made the little wizards of Slytherin even more proud and arrogant. Little wizards who are not liked by others. The wizards are even more annoying. I don't know how these little snakes will show off next school year. It's strange that Gryffindor students are in a good mood. Finny, who had already realized this, did not go to the Weasley brothers and George. If he went to them at this time, even if they didn't say anything, the other little lions would inevitably think that he was going to show off. Compared with the Snake House and the Eagle House, the little badgers of Hufflepuff didn't care. They haven't won the house cup for many years. They really have no idea about this. After all, they are still annoying and don't like fair competition. Slytherin won the house cup, which was not something worth celebrating. Inuan is a little sad, they are only 5 points away, otherwise they would win this year, which is a pity. In such a weird atmosphere full of excitement, sadness, and pity, Dumbledore hurried over and stood on the platform in front of the auditorium. He raised his hand to signal everyone to keep quiet. The noisy noise in the auditorium gradually subsided and he left. Well, I'm very happy that another year has passed. Dumbledore also seemed very excited, perhaps because he could have a holiday without being forced to work by Professor McGonagall. Before you enjoy the delicious food, I must ask you to patiently listen to me, an old man, say a few more words. This year has been wonderful, and the attention and thoughts in your minds must be richer than in the past year. You will also try some ideas during the following holidays, which is good, but I still need to remind everyone that the Ministry of Magic does not allow underage wizards to use magic alone outside of school. However, I still hope that you can do it next year. Before you start, digest the things in your brain and make some space to prepare for what's next. Now, we should start the award ceremony of the Academy Cup. The specific scores of each academy are as follows: the 4th place Hufflepuff, 250 points, the 3rd place Gryffindor, 395 points, the 3rd place 2nd place, Ravenclaw, with 439 points, and our 1st place, Slytherin, with 444 points. Let us congratulate Slytherin House for winning this year's House Cup. As Dumbledore's voice fell, a thunderous cheer and stamping of feet erupted from the Slytherin table. Even though the matter was already clear, the little wizards still heard Dumbledore's announcement. Very excited. Finny frowned when some Slytherin students banged their goblets on the table. This behavior caused a lot of the orange juice in his glass to spill out. However, in the auditorium, except for the excited celebration of Slytherin students, the applause from other houses could be said to be pitiful, which shows how annoying this house is now. Although Snape still had a rigid cold face, Finny noticed that the corners of his mouth were slightly raised, and he seemed to be in a good mood. He was talking to Professor McGonagall, who had a somewhat stiff face. Looking at Professor McGonagall's face that wanted to curse, Finny suddenly wondered if the reason why Slytherin's little wizard was so annoying was because of their Dean sneakers. Why is Puya so annoying? Yes, Slytherin is doing well, but everyone should be quiet. The auditorium became very quiet, and the smiles of the Slytherin snakes also faded a lot. Well, the Ministry of Magic doesn't want me to tell you these things, but since you are here and there are people who have experienced some things personally, I still think it is necessary to let you know what we are about to face now. Yes, my Mr. Phineas Black was kidnapped by vampires not long ago. However, fortunately, he returned safely and brought us some very useful news. According to this news, we inferred that there is shocking news. The vampire clan may have betrayed the wizards. They may attack the wizards at any time. Therefore, I hope you will not go out alone without your parents during the next holidays. Don't go to alleys and other places with many dark creatures. You must know that although the bites of vampires will not necessarily lead to transformation like werewolves, there is still a chance that the little wizard will become a vampire. Dumbledore's words caused a strange silence to fill the auditorium at this time. As mentioned before, vampires are not looked down upon by wizards, not only in the eyes of adult wizards. Many young wizards also completely look down on such dark creatures because of their parents. In their impression, this kind of creature can only live in the dark corners of the corner, barely surviving with a hungry meal. Now, someone told them that the vampires were going to betray the wizards, and they would wage war against the wizards, and they had the strength to do so. This was an absolute joke in the eyes of the wizards, and they would not take it seriously at all. However, it happened that the person who said this was Dumbledore, the greatest white wizard. Dumbledore, who was so powerful that the mysterious man did not dare to provoke him 10 years ago, said something that made the young wizards believe it. Moreover, when he said this, the professors looked very bad, but they did not refute it. So, this is the fact. The magic world is still not peaceful now. If Finny knew that the young wizards around him thought this way, he would definitely tell them with a sneer that the magic world has never been peaceful. The delicious food at the dinner was very rich, but the young wizards did not have the same excited atmosphere as before, and the weirdness still spread throughout the auditorium. For this, Professor McGonagall still complained about why Dumbledore told the news. In fact, it is understandable. For young wizards from pureblood or mixed-blood families, their elders will definitely tell them these things when they return home, so as to prevent their children from being attacked by vampires because they do not understand this matter. However, young wizards of Muggle origin do not have such treatment. No one in their family is a senior official in the Ministry of Magic, and they do not understand the current situation in the magical world. If they do not know these things, they will encounter vampires when they go out alone. Attacks would be bad. Never expect the Ministry of Magic to seek justice against Muggle wizards. After the dinner, George and Fred found Finny, who was about to go to the room of requirement on the 8th floor, and invited him to visit their home during the summer vacation. The Weasley family was ready to thank Finny for saving the brothers. And Finny has never refuted the fact that he saved them both, even though he was essentially the one who implicated them, and the vampires themselves had no intention of killing anyone. However, the friendship between the Weasley family is still good, especially since this family is very friendly and loyal people. After thinking about it for a while, Finny agreed to the matter. It was a silent night, at least that's what Finny thought, until the next morning, before leaving school, a message spread throughout the castle in an instant. Filch suffered retaliation, and some unbelieving little wizards went to Filch's office to check it out in person, and then ran away due to the stench. However, no little wizard sympathized with Filch, and some people were even cheering loudly for the unknown warrior. When he smelled the smell, Finny knew who the warrior was. It was the work of the Weasley twins, George and Fred, who had attacked him in the same way before. Looking at George and Fred who looked excited, Finny walked over and coughed softly twice. "Cover up, don't expose it." Then he whispered to the two brothers. When the two brothers heard this, they were stunned for a moment, then looked at Finny in surprise, and said excitedly, "Sure enough, you guessed it. You are our perfect one. Partner. So let me be your partner and work together for the Pirate King." Finny couldn't help but roll his eyes when he heard Gemini's words, complaining inwardly. Just when Finny was helpless, the twins were laughing, and the little wizards were watching the fun. Professor McGonagall came over with a lot of notices. She glanced at Filch's office with disgust, but she had no intention of helping Filch clean up his office, although she could do it with just a wave of her wand. She announced loudly that she would ask the freshmen to sign a pledge, promising that they would abide by the reasonable restraint of minor wizards outside of school. While signing, Finny felt a power shrouding his body, a vague presence. Coming from a pureblood family and having read many books, he knew very well that this power was the power of a contract. However, the binding force of this contract was not strong. It was more like a sensory contract. This is the trace of the magic world, a kind of contract magic that monitors the little wizard. As long as there are magic fluctuations around the little wizard, the trace will be touched, and the Ministry of Magic will also get corresponding news, so it can judge whether the little wizard has violated the restraint law. The magic of this promise will automatically expire when you reach adulthood. After everyone signed, Professor McGonagall issued a notice to everyone and warned everyone that magic was not allowed during the holiday. George looked at the notice in his hand and sighed. Fred shook the notice and said, "I really hope they forget to send this to us." For the brothers, not being able to use magic during the holidays was an absolute torment. Finny smiled and shook his head and whispered to the two of them, "Actually, you don't have to worry at all. the Ministry of Magic has no idea who is using magic. They can only sense the magic fluctuations around the little wizard through traces. When George heard this, his eyes lit up and he said, "In other words, if you are in a wizard family or a gathering place for wizards, the traces on the little wizard will always react?" Finny nodded. "Yes, that's it. Therefore, the Ministry of Magic has no idea whether young wizards from wizarding families use magic, so they don't care about it. So, if you use magic at home, you don't have to worry about being enchanted. Ministry of Warning." At this point, Finny curled his lips and said, "Just like me, I have a lot of house elves in my house, and they use magic when they work. If the Ministry of Magic keeps paying attention to my traces, then they will definitely be annoyed to death, because there are elves everywhere in my house. It's magic. House elf. Wow." George and Fred suddenly screamed. "My mom always wanted one, but my family couldn't afford one. All we had was the nasty ghoul in the attic and the gnomes in the garden." Finny shrugged and said, "House elves are a race conquered by wizards in ancient times. They became what they are now after blood contracts and domestication. The Weasley family has always been a relatively kind family and is close to muggles. Therefore, there are no house elves. The inheritance is also normal." George also shrugged and said, "Yes, although the Ministry of Magic has a house elf relocation office, they have always resettled house elves based on money. Our family will definitely not be able to have one." Finny nodded and said in agreement, "Indeed, the price of elves at the Ministry of Magic is too high. I spent a lot of money to buy these elves before. Oh, by the way, why don't I give you one? My house elves happen to have two recently. Once the baby is born, the newborn elf is most suitable to be given to other families. This is indeed the case. House elves are very precious at any time. As long as a family still has house elves, it means that their heritage is still there. And because house elves know too many things about the family, so, rarely abandoned or given away. Only young, newly born house elves are sold or given away. A long time ago, baby house elves were a very precious gift, and only close friends could give such a gift." When George and Fred heard this, their eyes lit up. You must know that if there was a house elf, their family's living conditions would be much better than now. However, the two of them finally rejected Finny's proposal and did not ask for the house elf that Finny sent. The Weasley family was indeed poor and in great need of a house elf, but this did not mean that they could accept such an expensive gift from someone they regarded as a friend. Finny glanced at Gemini and brought the topic back. "So, you can use magic as long as you are at home during the holidays. Young wizards from pureblood families can only rely on the supervision of their own families." George sighed and said, "Our mother wouldn't let us use magic in the house." Fred smiled and said, "But we can use it secretly." Jordan looked at the two of them helplessly and said, "You'd better be careful. I don't want to hear the news that you were beaten to death by your family when school starts." They separated in Gryffindor Tower while joking. George, Fred and the others were going back to the dormitory to pack their luggage, while Finny was going to the Ravenclaw's Chamber of Secrets to choose some books to take home. As for his luggage, Puff had already packed it. Moreover, George and his friend's luggage should have been packed by the school elves, but Finny still didn't tell them about it because he needed to go to the room of requirement. After a while, several people met at the door of the Gryffindor Lounge and walked together towards the carriage outside the campus. The train station is in Hogsmeade Village next to Hogwarts, and to get to the village you need to take this seemingly fully automatic carriage. Of course, Finny knew very well that these carriages were pulled by Thestrals, which are a very special magical animal and a species of Pegasus. It looks like a reptile, skinny, with a dragon-like face and broad bat-like wings. They are very rare. However, they have a bad reputation, and for centuries it has been regarded as an unlucky symbol because it is scary in appearance and can only be seen by those who have witnessed death. But in fact, many powerful wizards choose to tame some Thestrals to pull carts, because they have strong directional awareness and accurately understand where the rider wants to go. If the destination is determined, the rider only needs to tell it their name, and it will take them to the predetermined location, just like Owl Mail. When the four of them walked to the lobby on the first floor, Filch suddenly jumped out from the side, like a wild beast, staring at the few people with two red eyes. "You did it, right?" The four of them were stunned and looked at each other. Finny shrugged and said, "I don't even know what you're talking about." Filch looked at the twins angrily. "Don't think I don't know, it's definitely you who did it. My office is filled with the smell of shit." Jordan coughed slightly and said, "We went to bed early last night. Only you can play with that thing." Filch remained unyielding, his eyes filled with anger. Finny looked at the twins helplessly. These two were usually very smart, but why were they so stupid at this time and would actually use such iconic things to prank them? However, he couldn't see the twins being punished just before the holiday, so he said. As far as I know, dung eggs are not uncommon. They are sold in Hogsmeade. Although the two of them often play with them, it doesn't mean that others don't have them. Upon hearing Finny's flowers, Fred's eyes lit up and he said. That's right, why do you say we did it without evidence? We still have to go home, please give way. With that said, he and the other three walked around Filch, suppressing a smile and boarded the carriage at the door. After the carriage started and walked for a while, several people finally couldn't help laughing. Did you see Filch's expression at the end? It was so funny. Jordan smiled and said. George nodded. Indeed, shocked. Still overwhelmed. Fred added. Finny shook his head and said. You two have a better memory and don't be so rough next time. This means that the professors don't like him and they don't want to get into trouble during the holidays, otherwise you will definitely be found out. While they were joking, George and Fred were worried about whether Filch would cause trouble for them next school year, while Jordan talked about interesting things his father encountered while broadcasting. The journey to the station was quite easy. Finny did not choose to let Puff take him home directly, but chose to call it the Hogwarts Express with a few people. After all, it was called this car when it came, and it should be called this when it left. That's right. The train started gradually and passed through grasslands and lakes. Unlike when he arrived alone in a box, this time, Finny had a few more friends by his side. As the train passed through Muggle towns, they were eating BB's multi-flavor beans provided by Jordan to see who had worse luck. One was the European Finny. I was very lucky. After experiencing orange, apple, strawberry, banana and other flavors, George stuffed a gray bean into his mouth. Yeah, it's chocolate flavored. This is impossible. Fred shouted, picking a bean, breaking it in half, and throwing half into his mouth. It smells like booger. He said this and threw the other half to Finny. It turns out that what Finny ate was not booger flavored, but coconut flavored. This result even made the three of them call Finny cheating. In this regard, Finny could only say that Oh Huang was unreasonable. Finally, the train stopped at the 9 3/4 platform of King's Cross Station. Several people took off their wizard robes, revealing the one underneath. Brothers George and Fred wore jackets commonly worn by Muggles, while Jordan wore a sweater. Finny was different. He wore a black 4-piece suit. After putting a golden pocket watch with the black family crest inside his coat, Finny took his box with the traceless extension spell in his hand. George and his friends were so envious because they had 2 suitcases. An old guard stood at the ticket gate of the platform. He supervised the young wizards and allowed no more than 3 people to pass at a time to prevent the Muggles from discovering any abnormalities. After walking out of the platform and saying goodbye to George and the others, Finny came to a corner. Puff. With a snap, Puff and Creature appeared beside Finny. He handed the box to Puff and said. Send it home, Creature, take me to Diagon Alley. Puff and Creature bowed to indicate that they had heard the order. One of them returned to number 12 Grimmauld Place with the box and luggage, and the other took Finny to Diagon Alley. Go to Gringotts to get some money first. I don't have much change on me. Although Finny said this, he still had dozens of gold galleons on him. He really didn't have much change, so he was going to find the goblins to exchange some silver sickles and copper nuts. After coming out of Gringotts, Finny went straight to Ollivander. Although the wand he bought through the system was very easy to use, in the eyes of others, it was the wand he stole from the vampire, and it was not the best wand. A wand that suits him. Moreover, because the unforgivable curse had been used on that wand, Dumbledore thought it should be put away and no longer used, to prevent the Ministry of Magic from using this reason to embarrass Finny. Finny thought about it and thought it was right, so he also chose to come to Ollivander's to buy a new wand. Moreover, it's time to prepare a wand that best suits you and is extremely powerful and bind it to a ring. Of course, Finny, the wand bound to the ring, already has some ideas, that is, advanced customization of the system. Unlike the custom wand with 30,000 gems, this was the first time he appeared in the mall after escaping from the vampire castle **. It is worth 100,000 gems. You can choose the material, wand body, wand core, and style. Because of the system, the wand will be directly marked with Finny's logo. There will be no betrayal of Finny, and there will be no possibility of incompatibility. To put it simply, no matter what the material of the wand is, it will fit Finny perfectly, and it must be the most suitable one. The topic is a bit far off topic. At this time, Finny does not have that many gems to accumulate, so naturally he cannot purchase this service. However, since it has been decided, Finny's primary purpose now is to save gems and purchase this service. Ollivander's wand shop is still the same as it was a year ago, old, shabby, and dusty. There is still the lone magic wand in the window, placed on the purple cushion. Pushing open the store door, the bell above the door rang loudly. "Ah, Master Black, long time no see." Ollivander heard the sound and came out of the back room of the wand shop, and greeted Finny warmly. You know, because Finny didn't buy his first wand at the specified age, he couldn't enjoy the discount of the first wand for a little wizard. When he bought it at the original price, he also paid a certain confidentiality fee. Now, when he comes here this time, he will definitely buy a wand. However, because he has already purchased a wand, he cannot enjoy the preferential policy. And in order to prevent wizards from deliberately destroying wands, the price of wands is often more and more expensive. To put it simply, for an 11-year-old wizard, the first wand usually costs less than 1 galleons due to preferential policies. If an accident occurs and you need a second wand, you need to buy it at the original price, which ranges from 30 to 50 galleons. And if you need to buy a third wand, it will cost anywhere from 50 to 80 galleons. After that, it's 80 to 100, or even more expensive. Of course, Finny has always felt that Ollivander's policy of making huge profits through this has not been denied by the Ministry of Magic. This may be because the Ministry of Magic wants to prevent wizards from maliciously hoarding wands. Moreover, because the first wand often has preferential policies, and wizards cherish their wands, many wizards may only have one wand in their lifetime. It is difficult for Ollivander's wand store to make a profit, so it is there may be such a policy, hoping to recover previous losses by purchasing magic wands multiple times. You know, the big buyers of wands are the Aurors of the Ministry of Magic, and the preferential policy for young wizards is also stipulated by the Ministry of Magic. Long time no see, Mr. Ollivander, I think you have heard that I was kidnapped by vampires before and they lost my wand, so I need another wand. Ollivander nodded and said. Oh, yes, I heard that. I feel sorry for that wand, but it doesn't matter. You can definitely find a second wand that fits so well. Remember. It's not the wizard who chooses the wand, it's the wand that chooses the wizard. Finny took over Ollivander's next words. Ollivander was not annoyed when Finny interrupted him, but felt very happy, because what Finny said was exactly the belief of his family when they made the wand. However, Finny has always felt that this was a statement made by the Ollivander family specifically to highlight the extraordinary nature of the wand. You know, many years ago, Ollivander still accepted custom wands. At that time, the wands also had the most advanced cores. When there is chaos. What dead cats, beards of mountain monsters, hair of wizards, etc., you can't think of it, there's nothing they can't do. At that time, those wizards believed that the core of the wand should be something commemorative or precious. Later, the saying that wands choose wizards gradually spread, and the business of customizing wands slowly disappeared. Many pureblood families still collect wands that were custom-made at Ollivander's. For example, Finny's family has a wand belonging to his grandfather. The core of the wand is the beard of a three-headed dog. The Black family once raised some canine magical creatures, such as swallow-tailed dogs. Then, let's try the original wand material first. Ollivander thought for a moment and said. I remember that your wand has a hornbeam body, a dragon heartstring core, and is 13 inches. It is a very personal wand. I think you must be very talented in performing magic. Finny nodded. You remember correctly, it's a hornbeam wand with a dragon heartstring core. It's very easy to use. Ollivander nodded, took out a wand box from the wall behind him, took out the wand inside and handed it to Finny. It's still a wand with a hornbeam body and a dragon heartstring core. Let's see if there have been any changes in you over the years. Finny took the wand and waved it casually. A light spot appeared on the head of the wand, which was very comfortable, but it didn't feel like an arm like before. Ollivander also took out the wand immediately, shook his head and said. No, it's still suitable for you, but it's not the most suitable wand for you. But, fortunately, we have a direction, right? Then he took out another wand and handed it to Finny. Well, let's try one. It has a hornbeam stick body and a unicorn hair core. It's 12 inches and slightly hard. Finny took the wand and waved it casually. There was still a reaction, but the feeling given to Finny was not as good as the last one. Ollivander shook his head and said. No, it's not a unicorn. Then, let's try the phoenix feathers. Then he handed Finny another wand. This time, Finny felt much better, although it still couldn't reach the wonderful feeling of being like a part of the body. Ollivander also frowned when he saw this. That's not right, but it seems that the phoenix feather suits you very well, Master Black. Finny nodded and said. Indeed, this wand gives me a much better feeling, but it's not the most suitable yet. Ollivander nodded and said. Then, let's change the material of the staff. As he said that, he turned around and started rummaging through the pile of wands. Dragon heartstrings, unicorn hair, and phoenix feathers are my most commonly used wand core materials. However, because phoenixes are relatively rare, phoenix feather wands are the ones I make the least. Finny nodded and said. If you have the chance, I'll help you keep an eye on it. Ollivander came over with several wands, smiled and said to Finny. Thank you in advance, Master Black. Then, let's try this one first, cedar wood and phoenix feathers. Finny took the wand and Ollivander continued. Cedar is often suitable for wizards with strong talents. Obviously, Master Black, your talent is not too bad. Finny nodded and waved the wand, and a slight breeze blew by. Apparently the wand recognized Finny, but it was still not the most suitable. Seeing this, Ollivander couldn't help but become confused. It shouldn't be. Is my thinking wrong? Then, try this one. The English oak stick body that is particularly loyal to wizards is still made of phoenix feather core. 11 inches. Finny took the wand, but this time there was no response. Obviously, it didn't recognize Finny. Ollivander saw this and said very distressedly. It's very picky, but it doesn't matter, Master Black. I have seen wizards who are more picky. Oh, by the way, maybe that combination can suit you. Please wait a moment. With that said, Ollivander ran towards the back room excitedly. After rummaging around for a while, Ollivander came out with a wand. Try this combination, rosy wood, phoenix feather, 14 inches, a little longer than the one you had before. Superb combination, rosy wood is perfect for making wands, they are great for defense, and great for clear minds, people with a pure heart. At the same time, this wand is also very powerful in duels. It has the same effect as your previous wand. Not to mention the phoenix feather, it has initiative and extremely powerful spellcasting ability. These are all excellent features. Of course, there is a special reason why this combination is called an extraordinary combination. Finny took the wand and looked at Ollivander and said. You said, I'm also curious. Ollivander continued. Today's greatest white wizard, Professor Albus Dumbledore's first wand was a combination of rosewood and phoenix feathers, and that wand also laid many foundations for his current reputation in the wizarding world. In the early days, Dumbledore used it to win many world championships such as the Dueling Competition Championship and the Spellcasting Technique Championship. Finny's eyes lit up. If this wand is really what Ollivander said and suits him, then he should choose it. Thinking this way, he waved the wand in his hand. The 14-inch length did not cause him any discomfort, but was extremely comfortable. The magic power in his body flows through the wand without any stagnation or jerkiness, as if the wand is a part of his body. Finny knew very well that this was one of the features that made the wand fit so well. Ollivander also said excitedly. It's amazing, Mr. Black. I would like to congratulate you and look forward to making your own name in the magical world. Finny nodded and touched the wand in his hand. He liked this wand very much. It had a simple appearance without too many patterns. Even the handle of the wand was not very eye-catching. How much does this wand cost? Also, I remember that you also sell some wand equipment here, right? Ollivander rubbed his hands back and forth and said with a smile on his face. This wand was not made by me, but by my father during his lifetime, so it will be more expensive. In addition, the value of the phoenix feather itself is very high. If you buy this wand, it will still be at the original price, which is 70 plus long. Finny frowned and said before, generally speaking, the original price of a wand ranges from 30 to 50 galleons, and one costs 70 galleons, which is indeed very expensive. Ollivander continued. Of course, because you are a distinguished guest, I can provide you with wand processing services and add handles, protective covers, or canes and other equipment to your wand. Finny nodded and said. Okay, then add a cane for me. Ollivander nodded and asked again. So, what style do you want the head of the cane to be? I remember you are from Slytherin House, right? How about choosing a snake? The head of Mr. Lucius Malfoy's cane is a snake head, or it is the symbol of your family, choose wolf head. In fact, Ollivander wanted to say dog-headed, but that didn't sound very good. Moreover, no one but themselves knew whether the Black family crest was a dog or a wolf. Finny thought for a moment and nodded and said. Well, let's go for the wolf head. I want a silver one, not a gold one. The gold one is too ugly. Adding a cane to the wand is a choice that many wizards make. There are even universal Hogwarts 4-house cane sets on the market, but the style is not pretty. Many wizards from pureblood families would choose to order from Ollivander. Ollivander, who was born as a wand maker, naturally has excellent carving and making skills. Moreover, the wands made for Ollivander can be directly installed on the wand, without the need to polish the wand like a general cane. Ollivander makes canes very quickly. There are cane embryos in his shop. You only need to choose the headdress on your hand and then make and install it. In less than half an hour, Ollivander handed a wolf head cane to Finny. In the cane was the wand Finny had just bought. Give the gold galleons to Ollivander, and both parties are clear. Finny did not go to other shops, and directly let Creature apparate to his home at number 12 Grimmauld Place. In the huge house, except for the house elf, he was the only one. Just came back from school, but he felt a little uncomfortable. It was too spacious and quiet here. Puff, who came back early, had already taken Finny's luggage out of the box, washed and ironed all the clothes and hung them up. The room was newly cleaned and full of the smell of sunshine. There was a pot of white fresh mulberry on the windowsill. It was the one Finny had raised when he was in school, although Puff had always been the one taking care of it. Chocolate was taking a nap on the cat climbing frame in the corner of the room, quiet and peaceful. The hairy-legged fishing owl Popsicle bought in the Soviet Union was now standing on the shelf next to the window of the room, occasionally eating the owl nuts in the small plate next to it. As early as the end-of-year exam, Finny let the Popsicle out and let it fly here by itself. Because of the Fidelia spell, even if Finny told the Popsicle the location in person, he was still a little worried whether it could fly back. Fortunately, it came back. This is much better than the owl that he brought when he bought chocolate before. Finny threw himself hard on the big bed in the room and closed his eyes slightly. The cane with the magic wand just bought rolled out of his open palm and stopped at the bedside. The Popsicle tilted his head and looked at his little master in confusion, cooed twice, and closed his eyes. Chocolate noticed that Finny had fallen asleep, jumped from the cat climbing frame to the bed, curled up in Finny's arms, and closed his eyes again. Because of Finny's effective training and some unknown reasons, the habits of his pets have improved. At least species like cats and owls, which are more energetic at night, will fall into a state of dozing or really sleeping to rest in order not to disturb Finny's sleep. It was already evening, but Finny was not very hungry. Instead, he felt a little tired after sitting on the train all day. This is one of the benefits of having a house elf. He doesn't need to eat on time. If he is too tired, he can just take a nap. When he wakes up, he can just tell the house elf to cook. Under the effect of magic, the elves can prepare a big meal in 3 or 4 minutes. When Finny wakes up again, it is completely dark. The street lights on the street are lit sporadically, barely able to illuminate the road, but there are still many dark corners. Occasionally, 1 or 2 cats or dogs bark in those dark corners, but it does not break the quiet atmosphere. He shook his numb arms, carried the sleeping Chocolate to its nest, picked up the cane that had fallen to the ground at some point, opened the door and walked out. "Who's on duty today?" Finny whispered to the air. There have always been some rules for house elves in this house, which were established by Finny later. After all, the Black family only had one house elf before, that is Creature, and the rest were given away or taken away due to separation and other reasons. It was only after Finny bought so many that the house became so clean and new. Since there were more house elves, Finny followed the rules and divided the shifts into several shifts. He no longer needed to wake up the sleeping house elves when the master needed them, as before. "Master, it's me." With a snap, a male elf appeared next to Finny. Finny took a look and nodded. "It's Egg Roll." The house elf bowed to Finny and said. "It's me, master. Do you have any instructions?" Finny nodded and said. "I'm hungry. Please prepare some food for me." Egg Roll nodded and disappeared with a snap. He went to the kitchen. There were naturally house elves on duty in the kitchen who did not go to sleep. With the 2 shifts day and night, there were always enough house elves in the house to serve Finny and surround the safety of the house. Finny's original room was on the 3rd floor of the house. However, after his mother died, after keeping the house secret with the help of Dumbledore, he asked the house elves to renovate the house and build a floor above the 5th floor, which is the 6th floor. The 6th floor still has 3 rooms. The 3 rooms are Finny's bedroom, which is the one where he slept before. There is a pot of white osmanthus on the windowsill, an owl stand near the window, and chocolate cat climbing frame, cat litter and cat bed in the corner of the room. The other two are Finny's study. Finny has moved all the books in the house, whether good, bad, wizard or muggle, into it. At the same time, this room will also be the room where Finny conducts magic research. The last room now has many glass frames, which are used by Finny to store his collections. At the same time, his clothes are also placed here, but for the time being, there is nothing else except clothes. Outside the 3 rooms is the corridor on the 6th floor, where Finny is standing at this time. Watching the egg roll disappear, Finny walked down the stairs with a cane. There are some blank portraits in the corridors of several floors. Their existence is not only to facilitate the movement of the portraits of the Black family ancestors, but also to leave space for Finny to hang any portraits in the future. Of course, Finny restricted the movement of some portraits in the house, such as his mother. Because the Black family also has the custom of internal marriage, some family members' mental emotions are not normal. Although the portraits of these people were not moved away by Finny, they were still imprisoned in a room on the 2nd floor. Finny converted a guest room on the 2nd floor into a room dedicated to the portraits of ancestors. Finny did not go to the restaurant in the basement but found a place to sit in the living room on the 2nd floor. There is no need to eat somewhere at home. Of course, if there are guests at home, it is naturally not possible. However, at least no one will come to the house now. When Finny sat down, Danwan had prepared a meal for Finny. Because it was not a formal meal, Danwan did not make too much food. There were only some desserts and a pot of black tea. It can be said to be a very simple afternoon tea mode. This is also in line with Finny's idea. He originally planned to eat something simple and go back to sleep. There are still many things to do tomorrow. A few days ago, the magical animal store in Diagon Alley sent him a letter. The letter said that the niffler he ordered a year ago was about to give birth. According to the agreement, Finny would go to watch the birth of the little guy and then choose one to take away. Although the creature niffler is cute and useful, adult or even young nifflers are very annoying. After all, they are another kind of destroyer, and the other is the husky, which is called Era among muggles. Therefore, Finny needed a newly born niffler that had not yet formed any habits to be brought back for training by the house elf, at least to ensure that it would not destroy the house. You know, Finny's house is the ancestral home of the Black family. There are many gorgeous and shiny black magic items in it. Even Finny is not sure which items are dangerous, and Sniff, a creature like this, will not pay attention to those things. Whatever is shiny must be put into one's abdominal bag. So, after having snacks, Finny went back to his room to rest. Early the next morning, Finny went directly to the Fantastic Beasts shop in Diagon Alley with the help of Puff. "Mr. Black, you are here." Seeing Finny appear, the store clerk hurried over to say hello to Finny. Because of the training of Niffler, Finny provided a lot of funds for this magical animal store. Moreover, the magical animal store also secretly tricked Finny. Although Finny didn't care, this does not mean that it is not needed. If you respect Finny, you should pay more attention to it. After all, if you kill such a fat sheep once, you can have it a second time. Finny looked at the clerk who ran over and nodded. "Well, how's the situation with Shio? I received a letter from you earlier, saying that the delivery date is very soon." The clerk nodded and said, "Yes, according to Mr. Scamander's estimation, the day of delivery is tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. If you don't come over today, sir, we will send a letter to invite you over tomorrow." Finny waved his hand and said, "I may not receive the letters you send." "Okay, take me to see that niffler." The clerk nodded respectfully and guided Finny into the back room of the store, where there was a fireplace. "Sir, Shio is currently in our training center and needs to pass through the fireplace. You see, the fireplace is a means of transportation that has many advantages such as convenience, safety, convenience, etc., but it has only one disadvantage, that is, it will get dusty. Even with the cleaning spell, many people from pureblood families are unwilling to use it. That's why the store clerk asked." Finny nodded, looked at Puff beside him and said, "You go there with him and come back to pick me up." Of course, Finny is not against using the fireplace, but the fireplace moves according to the location mentioned by the user, and has a certain probability of appearing in different places. Therefore, when going to a strange place, Finny usually does not choose a fireplace. Puff and the clerk left here through the fireplace. After a while, Puff came back, took Finny's hand and appeared in the training center where they were going with a snap. Operating is really uncomfortable, but he has already gotten used to it after having been taken by house elves many times. This is also a preparation for him to learn to apparate in the future. After arriving at this place, Finny saw the clerk standing by the fireplace waiting for his arrival. In the meantime, the clerk said to him, "Mr. Black, please forgive me for not being able to tell you the distance here, but you can rest assured that your niffler has been raised by Mr. Scamander and was just sent to this breeding center the day before yesterday. Waiting for the birth and your arrival, and since the birth is approaching in these 2 days, Mr. Scamander is also here to take care of it. In fact, if it was just an ordinary niffler, the people at the magical creatures store would not take it so seriously. However, it was unbearable that Finny had spent too much money on it, and it would be bad if something unexpected happened. Of course, it wasn't that the store couldn't afford to pay, but that it couldn't afford to offend the Black family. In the final analysis, the magical beast shop is just an industry established by a mixed-blood wizard. Even though the Black family's status among purebloods is not very good now, it is not something that a mixed-blood wizard can afford to offend. It can be said that Finny is untouchable by most people in the magic world at this time, but he also has a bunch of powerful enemies that make him have to be cautious. Within the rules, Finny is not afraid of anything, just afraid of those people leaving. Means outside the rules. Finny nodded, showing that he understood the clerk. The clerk then took Finny towards a room inside. Pushing open the door to the room, Finny saw an older man with curly orange hair and some freckles on his face. "Mr. Scamander, this is the owner of Niffler." The clerk bowed to the old man and said. It seems that the old man in front of him is the author of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, and the famous magical zoologist, Mr. Newt Scamander. He was also the hero who captured the first Dark Lord Grindelwald. Finny hurriedly saluted Newt. "Hello sir, my name is Phineas Black." Newt nodded and said unnaturally. "I know, Dumbledore told me about you, and I took good care of your niffler." Finny nodded. "Sir, please take care of my shio personally." Newt shook his head and said. "No, I like them very much." Finny asked again. "So how's it going sir?" When talking about magical beasts, New York's unnatural demeanor became much better, and he said excitedly. "It's a coincidence that you came here. If nothing happens to this little guy, the production will be completed today." Finny laughed when he heard this. It would be best to finish things today so that he can visit Mrs. Lovegood tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. As the heir of Ravenclaw, Finny urgently needs someone who can teach him. Wizards of ancient magic texts, after all, working behind closed doors cannot be as fast as someone teaching them. Of course, if Mrs. Lovegood disagrees, Finny will agree to find another living heir, such as Dumbledore or Nick Flamel. "So, sir, what's the reason for the strange color on the top of this sniffer's head? Will his offspring also have such characteristics?" Hearing Finny's question, Newt fell into deep thought. Looking at Newt who was deep in thought, Finny didn't interrupt him and just stood aside waiting. Such an old man deserves Finny's respect. After a moment, Newt spoke. "I'm not sure exactly what the reason is. It may be a mutation, or it may be because one of its parents is like this, or it may be a new species of sniffer. These are all possible, I can't be sure until it is finished producing, and I need to see if there will be such anomalies in the offspring." Finny frowned. He chose this sniffer's offspring as a pet because of this ray of heterochromia. Now even Newt Scamander is not sure whether there will be heterochromia in its offspring. This was a bit hard for Finny to accept, but it was already like this, so naturally it could only be like this. Shio's nests are usually built 20 inches underground, and they will be filled with shiny treasures found by Shio. They may be glass beads, gold coins, diamonds, gold and other properties. Anyway, as long as it is something shiny and golden, the nifflers like it. At this time, the nest where Shio is located is an artificial simulated underground nest. The entire production process of Shio will be carried out in this simulated nest. According to the Muggle classification of animals, a niffler is considered a mammal, but its production method does lay eggs. Yes, Shio needs to lay eggs. Unlike oviparous animals, Shio's pups need breast milk to grow. However, Shio does not have, and their milk is discharged through glands on both sides of the abdomen. Therefore, young sniffs will lick both sides of their mother's abdomen. Shio usually has a litter of about 6 to 8, and it usually takes 2 to 3 days after laying eggs to fully hatch, and then there is a year-long growth period. The entire process from egg laying to hatching is the production process of Shio. During this process, Shio will not leave his nest. A little after 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Newt sent someone to inform Finny that his niffler was about to lay eggs. Hurrying to the room where the Shio's simulated nest is, you can see that the sniff with the different colors on its head has used its front paws to dig out many small nests under the nest. The location of the next egg to be laid. With the help of magic, everyone can clearly see the location of these small nests, as well as the tunnels and holes connecting them under Shio's abdomen. Shio began to chirp. Its cry was different from other animals. It was much quieter. Just like their name, it made the sound of shio mixed with some whistling sounds. It sounded like the sound is like the breathing of some kind of animal. As the sound of shio became louder and louder, the first egg came out. After all, shio is not an oviparous animal. Its eggs are not independent one by one, but are connected together. The eggs are very small, like sparrow eggs, with mucus from shio's body in stone-like patterns on them. Finally, after 3 attempts, all 8 sniffer eggs were expelled by it, and the sniffer seemed to be relieved, slumped at the entrance of the cave, and did not get up, using its body and the nest itself to the seal maintains the temperature in the small nest where the eggs are laid. Although Shio was very tired, several people present could notice that this little guy was in a very good mood at this time. Normally, a Shio will give birth twice a year. However, because this Shio was decided by Finny, it took a year to cultivate and then prepare for this birth. This means that the talents of this litter of little Shio will be very good. Okay, take note that you only need to wait 2 to 3 days for these little Shio to hatch. If you want to take them away and cultivate them yourself, you need to wait for a week. The first few days after the little Shio is born you need to consume breast milk. Not only will your immunity be better, but your development in all aspects will be much better than if you don't consume breast milk. Newt looked at Finny and said. Finny nodded, indicating that he understood. Although this was somewhat inconsistent with his plan, it was still okay to wait for a few days for a little sniffer with outstanding talent and appearance. After looking at Shio for a few more times, he asked Puff to arrange for a house elf to keep an eye on the little guy to prevent any accidents. Finny and Newt returned to their respective rooms to rest together. Unlike Finny who was watching the birth of a Shio for the first time, Newt had seen it many times. However, there was still a certain danger in the birth of a Shio, especially for this little one who had been stopped from laying eggs once by human intervention. It's even more dangerous, that's why Newt kept staring at. If the production of Shio is completed successfully, then all we need to do is wait for Shio to come out of the shell and complete the immunization of the cubs. Newt, who has raised and studied magical animals for many years, has a magic potion that is very helpful in improving the physical fitness and immunity of newborn magical animals. Coupled with Newt's own experience, the magical beast store will let him the shareholders personally took care of this little guy. In the next 2 days, Finny walked around their breeding base accompanied by the clerk at the magical animal store, and saw the breeding process of many magical animals suitable for pets. In addition, Newt would occasionally join them, but it has increased a lot of wonderful knowledge about magical animals. Within 2 days, some strong little Shio had emerged from their shells. The Shio who just hatched is completely different from the Shio we see under normal circumstances. He is pink and tender, with no hair on his body. The webbing of the limbs is not fully developed, and the pink reveals the white of the bones and the red of the blood vessels, making it look very childish. Shio's most characteristic abdominal pouch and duckbill are not in their adult form at this time. The abdominal pouch is still just a pink pancake-shaped object, and has not been divided to form the abdominal pouch with its own huge space. The duck's beak is not that long, but is of normal size. If it weren't for the fact that it looks like Shio, we really can't see any characteristics of Shio. At this time, the little Shio's eyes were not fully opened. He just relied on his sense of smell to reach the entrance of the nest, stretched out his tongue and licked the mother's abdomen. This niffler will be the best-bodied of the litter, and also the most gifted. Newt introduced them to Finny. Finny asked in confusion. Why? Newt said. Although the nifflers are mammals, they hatched from eggs after all. The first ones to come out must have the best physical fitness. Similarly, because the cave where the nifflers lay eggs is not large, it can only allow 2 or so nifflers to go up to eat breast milk. Therefore, the first ones to come out will also be the first to eat. Similarly, they will have the greatest advantage in the future when fighting for food. Finny frowned and looked at Newt. Sir, have you found a way to improve it? Even if the survival rate of the nifflers is very high, they will die in this situation. If the nifflers did not give birth to 2 litters a year, they could give birth in 2 years. There would be no current number. Newt shook his head and said. I have no choice. The creatures like the nifflers play an important role in treasure hunting. Their instincts also make them tend to hunt for treasure. If their physical fitness is not strong, they will probably die in their own death. Yes, the act of sniffing for treasure is often an act of seeking death. The place with the treasure that Sniff is interested in is either a wizard's treasure house or an ancient ruin. These 2 places are not places where wild Shio can break in and still come out alive. Therefore, since Xiao Xiao was born, he has naturally eliminated those with particularly low physical fitness. After a while, the remaining little ones came out of their shells one after another, competing with this little one for the position at the cave entrance. Just as Newt said, the sniff that hatched first had a great advantage and was always in the best position. Gradually, the remaining little sniffs no longer competed for this position, but start fighting for the little corners. Watching this scene, Finny also had a smile on his face. He had already decided that if there were no heterochromatic sniffs in this litter, he would want the first little one to hatch. The little sniffs grew up very fast. Just like Newt said, they started to grow hair after 2 days. And they have gradually stopped taking breast milk. The little guy's eyes are about to open. If you want to take one away to raise, this is the best time. Otherwise, they will be very unhappy if they are taken away after seeing their mother. Moreover, they also have the smell of sniffing. A completely disobedient naughty character who destroys the house. One day later, Newt found Finny and said. Finny nodded. He had already chosen the niffler he wanted. It was lucky. Maybe his European luck also played a strong role in this matter. The first little niffler to emerge from the shell was a heterochromatic niffler, and he was also the only one. Putting the little guy in his pocket, Finny looked at Newt and the clerk at the Fantastic Beasts store and said with a smile. Then, I'll leave first. You've worked hard these days. Newt waved his hand and said. It's nothing. You are very talented in magical animals. If you don't understand anything in the future, you can write to me. Finny nodded. Okay, then I'll be in trouble, sir. As for the clerks at the magical creatures shop, Finny is their big customer, so he might not buy anything from them in the future, not to mention that whether it's owls, cats, or Sniff's food, all of them need to be purchased from them. Seeing that Finny was about to leave, he hurriedly handed over the things he had prepared. Mr. Black, this is the food we prepared for little Xiao Xiao. The little guy has only been born for a short time, so it is best to eat breast milk. This is the breast milk we prepared, as well as the complementary food he will need later. Finny looked at the contents of the bag handed over by the clerk. It was a large bottle of Xiao Xiao's breast milk, which they should have squeezed out from other Xiao Xiao's bodies in the past 2 days, and a small box of crushed shellfish, snails and other mollusk shell powder, which should be what the clerk said was complementary food. Handing the bag to Puff beside him, Finny smiled and said to the clerk. Thank you very much. If necessary, I will choose your store again. Finny knew very well why the clerk was so dedicated to him. In the final analysis, it was because he was rich. If it weren't for the Pureblood family's greater ambitions and unwillingness to just give away the money, then my current situation would have been solved long ago. Even if the Black family is lonely, they have never been short of money. The mountain full of gold in Gringotts underground vault is still there. Okay, let's go. With a casual instruction, Puff took his hand and returned to the house at number 12 Grimald Place with a snap. Creature, is the nest I asked you to prepare earlier ready? Finny returned home and asked. Creature appeared next to him and said. Master, it's ready. The lair is made of gold coin models purchased in Muggle society. Finny nodded and said. Very good, this is the little one's food. Just drink this milk for the first few days. After that, you can add some complementary foods as appropriate, which are also included. Speaking of handing the bag in Puff's hand to Creature, it would be more appropriate to instruct Creature who stayed at home to do such a thing. Puff, I want to have Chinese food tonight. You go and tell the kitchen. When the meal is ready, go to my room and call me. Finny said casually and walked up the stairs to his room. At this time, there was another thing in his bedroom on the 6th floor, which was the sniffing lair that he had asked Creature to prepare before. It was a tree root, with a nest opened on one side. It was full of fake gold coins. Although it was fake, it was still shining with gold. There were some shiny artificial crystals around it. It can be said that it was the most suitable environment for the growth of Sniff. Yes. The training of Sniff doesn't require Finny's personal experience, just leave it to the house elves. Little guy, you can just order milk tea from now on. Finny took out the little Sniff that was in his pocket, put it in the nest, and said with a smile. The little guy seemed to know that that was its name in the future. He squeaked twice, found a comfortable position among a pile of gold coins, and crawled to sleep. No matter what kind of animal it is, sleep is the most abundant time when it is just born, and it is also their normal state. Looking at Xiao Xiao milk tea who fell asleep again, Finny smiled and shook his head, reaching out to grab the popsicle beside him. He brought the popsicle to his study, wrote a letter and handed it to it, saying, Send this letter to George Fred and the others, and then wait for their reply to me. Popsicle screamed twice, grabbed the letter on the table, and flew out of the open window. When they were at Hogwarts, Brother George once invited Finny to their home for a simple visit. This is what Finny's letter is about, asking as to a suitable day for a visit. The Weasley family is indeed very poor, but they are one of the pureblood families after all, and their heritage is still there. In other words, the entire wizarding world's impression of the Weasley family is that they have red hair, freckles, and a lot of children. Yes, the Weasley family has always had many children and grandchildren since its emergence. If many of them had not chosen to live with Muggles, perhaps all the pureblood families in the wizarding world today would be their relatives. Even so, the Weasley family is related to most magical families, which is almost comparable to the Black family where the pureblood noble Finny belongs. You know, the reason why the Black family is in this situation is because the family has a long history and appeared early. Unlike the Malfoy, Weasley, Parkinson and other families, the Black family existed when Hogwarts was established. Everyone in the magic world knows that the Gaunt family is the descendant of Slytherin, but they don't know that Black and Slytherin also have some relatives. The Black family genealogy recognized by the magic world today starts from Phineas Blackeye, but no one knows that Phineas Blackeye, the famous Slytherin dean and Hogwarts headmaster, his mother is actually from the Gaunt family, and is a direct bloodline. It's just that Phineas Blackeye was unlucky not to inherit the snake old voice, and then the bloodline became increasingly thin, and there was no one with this talent. The topic is a bit far-fetched. In short, the Weasley family is underestimated by most pureblood families. Their most valuable thing has always been their connections. Not to mention that their family has a close relationship with Dumbledore and is one of the founders of the Order of the Phoenix. During the Second World War in the magic world, there were many Weasleys among the wizards who died. Even if they were not, most of them had relatives with the Weasley family. For example, the famous Pruitt brothers are Molly Weasley's brothers. Therefore, Finny's visit to the Weasleys may have been intended to find allies for himself. It was just right to use his relationship with George and his brother to get closer to each other. Perhaps because the Weasleys lived a certain distance from London, Popsicle came back in the evening after Finny had finished dinner. It brought back a reply from George and Fred. The letter agreed to visit the next day, and also wrote that Molly Weasley expressed her welcome to Finny's arrival. The next day, Finny came to Ottery St. Catchpole, a village near the Weasleys, with the help of Puff. This is a village where wizards and muggles live together. After the signing and implementation of the International Statute of Secrecy in the 17th century, a special magic community was established. There are many wizard families living nearby, including the Fawcett's, the Diggorys, the Lovegoods, and the Weasleys, Finny's target this time. Out of respect for the pureblood family, Finny did not go directly to the Weasley family with the help of Puff, but chose to come here and walk to the Weasley family. After passing through the fields and trees, there was a bush and a forest. The Weasley family was on the other side of the forest. Finny tightened the cane in his hand. The cane, which was originally used for decoration, showed its original function for the first time, assisting walking in clearing weeds. With the help of magic, Finny easily passed through the woods and saw the so-called Weasley family. It was a somewhat shabby yard with a shabby garage and the Weasley family's house. It seemed that this house used to be a large pigsty made of stone, and some rooms were added later. Now it has several floors, but it is crooked. If it were not for the magic, it would never be built. Even if it was built, it would collapse quickly. 4 or 5 chimneys were exposed on the red roof. I don't know why so many chimneys are needed for these fireplaces. There was a sign in front of the yard with the words, "The Burrow," written on it. It's so true, Finny sighed secretly. When you walk into the yard, you can see the high-top leather boots thrown by the door, the rusty crucible and a few fat chickens pecking in the yard. From the environment here, the chickens raised in the yard and the vegetables planted, you can see that the Weasley family is indeed different from other pureblood families. They live a very bad life. Like other pureblood families, the Weasley family is just like an ordinary family, but this does not make Finny look down on this family. He stood in front of the house, tidied his clothes, put the wand in his hand back into the cane, and gently knocked on the door of the burrow. After a while, a flustered footsteps came out of the house. Then the door opened, and a lady with red hair, not tall, but a little fat, stood inside and looked at Finny. The slightly curly, red hair and the kindly smiling face all showed her identity, the mistress of the Weasley family. Molly Weasley, the cousin of Finny's in-law. You are Mrs. Weasley, right? I am Phineas Black. I received a letter yesterday about today's visit. Finny took off his hat and made a gentleman's salute to Molly, introducing himself. Oh, Mr. Black, yes, I know you are coming to visit today. Please come in. Molly was also a little overwhelmed by Finny's respectful and formal words. It was not easy for the Weasley family to have visitors. Even if there were, they were their good friends, and there would be no such formal opening. Finny's words made Molly ignore the fact that he was just a child of the same age as her fourth and fifth sons. Instead, she invited him in with words for people of the same age. Finny said with a smile. "Mrs. Weasley, just call me Finny. If we are to be honest, I would call you cousin." Molly was stunned for a moment before she realized that the person in front of her was just a child. "Ah, Finny, come in, let's talk inside." Finny followed Molly into the house of the Burrow. Although the exterior of the house did not look very good, the interior was quite nice and warm, although it was not big. The Weasley family's living room is very small, so Molly brought Finny to the dining room, which is relatively large. Of course, the Weasley family's kitchen is still a bit crowded, with a very clean wooden table and chairs in the middle. There is no family tree on the wall of the kitchen, but there is a magic wall clock. There is only one needle on the clock, and there are no numbers. Some of them are about Molly's daily work such as making tea, feeding chickens, and you are late. There are 3 layers of books on the mantel next to the clock, but they are all daily magic books such as The Magic of Baking Bread, not magic books. There is also a magic radio next to the sink. This is one of the few Muggle technology products that is sold publicly in the magic world, and the Ministry of Magic also has a magic radio station. Gryffindor's George Lee's father is a staff member of the magic radio station. "I'm sorry, Finny, I didn't expect you to come at this time. I'll be a little late and come directly instead of walking." Molly looked at Finny and said apologetically. Finny smiled and shook his head. "It's my fault. I didn't inform you in advance before I came. As for walking here, it's because I think it's better to be formal for the first visit." Molly sighed and said, "Ah, if only George and Fred could be as polite as you." Finny smiled and said, "They are still very smart. At least those things about alchemy are not something ordinary wizards can learn, right?" Just as Finny and Molly were talking, a rush of footsteps came from the stairs. "Mom, is Finny here?" "Oh my God, Finny, you're finally here." 2 sentences in front and 1 back, it was obvious that the smart twins had come down. Finny turned around and greeted them with a smile. "Long time no see, George, Fred." To be honest, Finny really can't tell who the 2 of them are. Maybe in 2 years when their magic power is enough, Finny can tell them clearly through magic power, but it really can't be done now. George and Fred hugged Finny respectively, and then sat next to Finny, complaining about how they secretly used magic on the first day of the holiday and were discovered by magic, and then their wands were confiscated. At this time, a little girl with red hair and long pajamas also ran into the kitchen from upstairs. "Mom, you saw my..." The little girl didn't see Finny just now, but now she was stunned when she saw it. She looked down at her own outfit, then at Finny's outfit, and immediately turned around and ran upstairs. George smiled and said, "That's Ginny, our little sister. She might be a little shy seeing you here." Finny shrugged and said, "Why aren't you scared by me? I know very well that in the past few years, in the eyes of wizards, I have been called a devil who scares children. I am a minion of the mysterious man." Mo, who was busy making breakfast, heard this and retorted directly. "How could they say that?" Her tone was very bad. "You were still a child when the mysterious man fell." Finny said, "Maybe it's because I used the Death Eater list left by Regulus to report some wizards who were trying to take action on the Black family's property, which made most people think that even though I was young at that time, I still had my own sense." "You can serve the mysterious man," Fred complained. "They are slandering you because you reported one of their people." Finny shook his head and said, "Fortunately, at least the Ministry of Magic didn't take such ridiculous news seriously, right?" "You're right." Another voice came over, and it was a very mature voice. Finny turned around and saw that it was an adult man with red hair and freckles on his face. It was Arthur Weasley. "Mr. Weasley." Finny said hello. Arthur nodded. "Hello, Mr. Black." "Mr. Weasley, just call me Finny." "Okay, let's eat first, Finny. Because I didn't know you were coming at this time, I didn't prepare it in advance, so the breakfast was a bit simple," Molly suddenly said. At the same time, some fried sausages, bacon, and bread were placed on the table. Finny smiled and said, "It's okay, Mrs. Weasley. I have always lived alone, and the house elves are responsible for the meals. I haven't eaten such loving food for a long time." George and Fred had been looking at Finny in surprise since their father came back, as if they had never known this partner before. Finny's eyes caught the expressions of the two of them and he said with a smile. "What's wrong with you? Don't you recognize me?" Fred said. "Just now I thought you were not Finny but Percy." "That's right, being polite and serious like that is what only Percy would do all the time," George added. Molly looked at Gemini angrily. "You two, learn from Finny. He is polite and is much better than you." "Oh, Mom. Spare us," George and Fred wailed. After a while, the little girl who ran up before came back again. This time she put on neat clothes. It seemed that the little girl felt shy because she was a little sloppy in her pajamas in front of strangers. Afterwards, Percy also walked down the stairs, followed by Charlie, who was in 7th grade at the beginning of school, and Ron, the youngest son of the Weasley family. Ron was a little sloppy at this time, and it seemed that Molly, who had a lot of children, sometimes neglected her youngest son. "That's our youngest brother, Ron," George introduced in Finny's ear. "Blake, welcome." Charlie extended his right hand to Finny. He welcomed Finny's arrival. Finny shook his hand. "My pleasure." Compared with Charlie, Percy is not so welcoming of Finny's arrival. In Percy's view, Finny is a minion of the mysterious man and not worth interacting with. Molly said. "Okay, let's all eat." Then sat on the other side next to Arthur. Ginny sat next to her mother, just opposite Finny, with Charlie and Percy next to her, and Ron sat next to Fred. Finny ate his second breakfast of the day in such a crowded and lively environment. The big family ate very quickly, and after a while, all the plates on the table were cleared away. After the meal, Molly said to George and others, "You guys go and clear out the goblins in the garden, they are making trouble again." Then he looked at Finny and said, "Oh, Finny, I think you must be tired since you came so early, you can go to George's room and have a rest." Finny shook his head and said, "Madam, I think we should not go to work with George today. When I came here just now, I found traces of goblins in the yard, so I asked Puff to deal with it." "Oh, Puff is the name of my house elf." Molly was stunned, then said to Finny, "Ah, thank you so much, this saves us a lot of trouble and solves a big problem." Finny shook his head and said, "It's nothing. George and I proposed to send a house elf here before, but they refused. If you need it, I will let one of the young house elves come over." Molly said hurriedly, "Thank you very much, but it's not necessary. Our family situation is not suitable for having a house elf. I am very grateful that you can help us this time, not to mention that you saved George and Fred's life before." Finny waved his hand and said, "Speaking of which, I still feel very sorry about that matter. After all, the target of those vampires has been me from the beginning. George and Fred were just implicated by me." Arthur said on the side. "Even so, if it weren't for you, George and Fred would probably die at the hands of those vampires. We still have to thank you." Molly looked at George and the others with a smile and said, "Okay, Finny has helped you finish your work, you can go play today." George and Fred immediately jumped up with joy and said to Finny, "Let's take you to our bedroom and show you our latest invention." At this time Mrs. Weasley yelled at the two of them. "You two, stop making that mess of yours in the room." George and Fred said in unison. "Got it, Mom." Then he whispered to Finny. "Mom, she thinks all our inventions are incorrect. She wants us to work in the Ministry of Magic after graduation. Only Percy would like the work of the Ministry of Magic. He will be the Minister of Magic in the future." Finny followed the two of them through the living room to the stairs. Before ascending the stairs, Finny noticed the Weasleys' second piece of magic, which was different from the one in the kitchen. There is a pointer on this piece, and there is a photo of each member of the Weasley family on the front of the pointer, which represents which person does not correspond to the pointer. Like the one in the kitchen, there are no numbers on it, but the places where each family member may appear, including home, school, prison, missing, Quidditch, etc. At 12 o'clock on an ordinary clock, there is even the word, Fatal Danger, engraved on it. That's a watch that has always been in our family, dating back to our grandfather's time. George saw Finny paying attention to their magic clock, so he explained. Fred added. Every time a Weasley is born, a new pointer appears, and if anyone dies, his pointer disappears. Finny nodded to express his understanding. He understood in his heart that this watch, like his family tree, was a magic item that was connected by blood to the family members. If a new member of the family tree is born, his portrait will appear on the carpet. If he dies, the portrait will turn into black and white. It is very similar to the Weasley family's magic clock, except that one is to observe whether members of the family are safety, and the other is to record the history of family members. The stairs of the Weasley family are very strange, uneven, winding and intricate, and can even be compared with the stairs of Gryffindor Tower in Hogwarts Castle. There are some platforms between the stairs, which can also be said to be floors. However, the Weasley family's house is not of a standard style, and there is no accurate way of saying which floors are on which floors. To put it simply, there is a room on a platform on a certain floor. It is not very high up the stairs. It is another platform and there is still a room. The rooms are staggered. This results in that almost no rooms are on the same level. Flat. On the third landing, there is a door that is half open. The decoration inside shows that this is a little girl's room. George smiled sheepishly and said, "This is Ginny's room. This girl is used to being carefree." Finny said with a shrug. "You brother and sister have a very good relationship." Fred smiled and said, "Of course, especially when you're teasing Ron." Hearing this, Finny couldn't help rolling his eyes and complained. "Ron is really unlucky to be your brother." George smiled and said, "Don't worry, Ron really likes our pranks." In response to this, Finny could only say, "Just be happy. Go up the stairs to a platform. There are these two doors. There is a small sign on the door. One of them said Percy's room, the other George and Fred's room." Fred pushed open the door to their room, revealing the room inside. The room is large, of course, compared to other rooms, maybe because there are two people living here. The room was filled with Gryffindor colors, and two single beds were placed on the left and right sides of the room. There is also a wardrobe, a table and a bedside table with a lamp in the room, which seems to be shared by the two brothers. The windows in the room are not big, and there is a vase of flowers on the table in front, which adds a touch of life to the room. The wardrobe is large enough to hold all the clothes of the two brothers. There are also several sealed cardboard boxes placed in the corner of the room. Not surprisingly, they are things that George and Fred have researched. There was still a smell of gunpowder in the air, and even the fragrance of flowers couldn't cover it up. Finny, who had just come in, frowned. "I said, are you two developing explosives in the room?" Fred was fine, but George was a little embarrassed. "Last night the two of us were working hard on pulling out fireworks, so the smell of gunpowder was quite strong in the room." Finny looked at the two of them doubtfully and asked, "Strongly pulling out fireworks? Have you researched anything?" Fred shook his head and said, "No, we haven't made much progress. There are indeed some traces of magic on the gunpowder, but those magics control the patterns and styles that appear after the fireworks explode." George added, "We still haven't thought about why this thing can be ignited when it is wet. There is no trace of magic in terms of ignition, and it cannot be an alchemical product. At least simple alchemical creations that can be mass-produced do not have such an effect." After hearing this, Finny said, "Man, don't be so absolute, otherwise how can the magic joke shop make money by jumping around and having fun? However, if you can't find a clue in the magic room, you can try the Muggle method." George was stunned, and Fred said in surprise, "Yes, there are Muggle ways. Why didn't we think of that?" George also looked at Finny with some surprise. "So, Finny, what good suggestions do you have?" Finny thought for a moment and said, "As far as I know, alkali metals and alkaline earth metals will burn when they encounter water. Calcium carbide, sodium dithionite, and metal hydrides also have the same effect." Fred and George were stunned when they heard Finny's words, and asked after a moment, "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" Finny was stunned for a moment, and then realized that there is no chemistry in the magic world, they only have alchemy, and not everyone can do it. After thinking about the wording carefully, he said, "Well, to put it simply, they are some metals or substances that are not complicated to make. They can also be regarded as alchemical products, but they are just the alchemy method of Muggles." George and Fred looked at each other and then said, "But, we don't even know what you're talking about, let alone study our prank products." Finny thought for a moment and said, "Well, it's simpler, quicklime. Quicklime will generate heat when it comes into contact with water. If at this time, there are relatively easy-to-burn substances nearby, such as white phosphorus, it will be ignited directly, which will have the effect of laboriously pulling out fireworks. Because there is no concept of Randian in the magic world, Finny doesn't know how to explain this matter. Speaking of which, he never thought that some knowledge from his previous life would be useful in a fantasy world like the magic world." Finny's words gave George and Fred a lot of inspiration. Both of them looked at Finny with red eyes. "Are there any other ideas? Any other great ideas?" What Finny was thinking of when George spoke was some of the original inventions of the two of them, such as the series of skipping candies, but he was not sure what inventions the two of them had at this time. I don't have any good ideas at the moment, but do you have any inventions? You can show them to me. Fred smiled and said. Is there anything I can't show you? While Fred was speaking, George had already stood up and closed the door. The conversation between the three people did not attract the attention of Percy, who was facing the door. The door to his room was always closed. As a child who loves learning, he didn't know how he could endure living on the same floor with these naughty twins. George closed the door and Fred moved the boxes. The two of them worked together very well. It seems that you have done this kind of thing once or twice. Finny teased. George spread his hands helplessly and said. There is no way, our mother always thinks that we are not doing our jobs properly. As I said before, she has always believed that entering the Ministry of Magic is a serious job. Fred said while taking out the contents of the box. Finny looked down and saw that there weren't many things in the box, only a few. A telescope, a wand, a feather, and a few dung eggs. That's all. Fred sighed and said. George added. Our mother hated these things. She destroyed and confiscated some before. Finny nodded and asked. What are these? George opened his mouth and introduced. They are the boxing telescope, the magic wand, the automatic inkjet quill and, you know, the shit egg. Fred introduced in detail. When the punching telescope is squeezed, it will punch the user, turning his eyes black and blue, and it is difficult to remove. It is one of our most satisfying products. The magic wand turns into a rubber chicken or underpants when waved. The automatic inkjet quill pen is something we really like. It sprays ink all over the user when it is used. It's great. Of course, there's also our favorite, the big dung egg. As the two brothers said the name of the big shit egg in unison, a drop of sweat fell from Finny's forehead. The inventions of these two brothers are indeed not big inventions, and they are not dangerous. However, if you are not careful, it is really easy to get tricked, and the consequences are still difficult to accept. Well, have you ever thought about it? We can actually make some candies, such as adding swelling potion to the candies. Fred and George were both smart people. When Finny said this, they thought of the effect and said excitedly. People who eat candy will either have enlarged tongues or develop sausage mouths. Finny nodded and said. I think prank items like this are quite interesting, especially the ones that enlarge the tongue. George nodded and said. Maybe it can be used to skip class. Finny rolled his eyes. Hey, we don't have many classes to begin with, and you still want to skip class. Fred shook his head and said. The meaning of skipping classes is not to make your time more abundant, but to enjoy the process of skipping classes. Even if it's just one class, we want to escape. Finny said speechlessly. If you skip classes, your tongue will become enlarged and it seems difficult to use it, especially Professor Snape's potions class. George and Fred immediately thought of the consequences if their tongues got bigger and they tried to skip class during Snape's class. If you weren't stupid, you wouldn't have put the swelling potion into your mouth. I really don't know if there is anything else in your head besides shit. Are you all trolls? You only have such a tiny bit of brain. Thinking of the scene where Snape roared angrily at the two of them, both of them suddenly shuddered. You're right, this thing can't be used to skip class. George and Fred said in unison. Finny continued. However, if you are sick, you may be able to skip class. George nodded. That's true. Fred and I were sent to the infirmary by Professor McGonagall once because our noses were bleeding. Fred's eyes lit up and he said. We can make a candy that makes your nose bleed. Finny nodded in agreement. If that's the case, then it's appropriate to skip classes. However, since it's to skip classes, you must have an antidote, otherwise you will be sent to the infirmary. George nodded and said. We can put the antidote and candy together, half and half, 2 colors. Eat half when you need an attack, and eat the other half after leaving the classroom. Fred nodded and said. I think it would be better to use nougat to make this thing. Finny was stunned and asked. Why use nougat? George said as a matter of course. Because we don't like it. Finny rolled his eyes and said. You don't mean that your little brother Ron likes to eat nougat, do you? Fred nodded, put his arm around Finny's shoulders and said with a smile. You are so smart. Imagine that Ron ate a piece of nougat and started to bleed from the nose. George said excitedly. That must be very interesting. Ron is really unlucky to be your brother. Finny complained. At this moment, he really felt incredible that Ron could live to this age. It was too difficult for Ron to grow up healthily under the torture of his brothers. This is when he remembered that Ron's fear of spiders in the original book was because when he was young, the twins turned a teddy bear that Roger loved into a big spider, which caused a psychological shadow. You know, if Finny remembered correctly, the teddy bear was the doll that Ron slept with. Imagine waking up from a sleep and suddenly a big spider appeared in your arms. After feeling sympathy for Ron again, Finny, George and Fred got involved in the research and development of a quick-acting candy for skipping classes. To fully realize this thing, we need advanced knowledge of potions. George said with emotion. Finny nodded and agreed. Indeed, it seems that you have to listen carefully to Snape's class in the future. The originally excited expressions of George and Fred suddenly froze when they heard what Finny said. For these brothers, Snape's classes were hell. Asking the two of them to listen carefully in Snape's class was the same as asking them to stop playing pranks, which was hard to accept. Looking at the two people with extremely troubled expressions, Finny smiled and said, "It must be admitted that some courses in Hogwarts are really useless, such as Professor Bin's History of Magic, and the elective courses we can take later on, including divination, care of magical creatures, and even Muggle studies in ancient runes. It is useful only for specialized people, but for most young wizards, it is of little use." Finny paused and continued. However, we cannot deny that most of the courses in Hogwarts are very useful. Even if they do not develop in that direction in the future, these courses still contain a lot of knowledge that can be used in other industries, such as potions. Herbalism, these will be of some help to you in developing prank props, especially in terms of reducing costs. George nodded thoughtfully. Fred was depressed on the sidelines. Like George, he knew very well that what Finny said was right, but he was still very depressed and needed to pay attention to the lectures in the future. Bang bang bang. There was a knock on the door. George stood up from the ground and went to open the door. Here comes Ginny, this little girl who often teases her little brother with her two brothers. Ginny was also holding a fruit plate in her hand, which contained not only common fruits in the Muggle world, but also some common fruits in the magical world. Of course, they were not expensive, but for the Weasley family, this is already the highest level of hospitality. Ginny did not leave directly after delivering the fruit, but sat on the ground in an unladylike manner like Finny and the other three. After breakfast, Ginny was full of affection for the big brother in front of her who didn't have a very good reputation in the wizarding world. She was no longer so fearful and shy. Of course, it was the kind of affection she had for her friends, and more importantly for her brother. Ginny had always had a figure in her heart, and that was the savior Harry Potter, who was 1 year older than her. Once she got to know her, Ginny no longer looked like a little girl. She was lively, cheerful, and like George and Fred, full of fun and very interested in teasing Ron. With Ginny's whimsical ideas as a child, the four of them determined the development ideas for many prank props in one afternoon, just waiting for them to slowly develop and produce them. For example, Ginny proposed an alchemical velvet that would not be as short-lived as living creatures, but could also be cuter and have some mischievous effects. If this thing is developed, it will definitely be very popular with little witches. This is a very good proposal. Finny stayed at the Weasley house for 2 days. On the one hand, it was because of the retention of Mrs. Molly Weasley, and on the other hand, it was indeed because this large and difficult family gave Finny some warmth of home, which he had not experienced in the past 10 years. After Regulus Blake disappeared, Finny's parents were not in the right mood. Coupled with the quarrel when Sirius came back later, his father immediately fell ill and died not long after. And his mother, Walburga Black, began to suffer a mental breakdown after her husband's death, and even in the later stages, she ignored her 3-year-old child. Sirius also died after the news came out that he was imprisoned in Azkaban for betraying the Potter family. Therefore, in fact, in this life, Finny did not feel the warmth of home very much. In the final analysis, the memories of the previous life are just the memories of the previous life. 12 years have passed, and Finny can no longer remember many things in his previous life. If it weren't for the fact that the world he lives in is the world of Harry Potter, and he deliberately recalls this part of his memory from time to time, he might have gradually lost his memory. Forget it. Of course, this is only because Finny has not mastered memory magic at this time. Human memory is a wonderful thing. Even if you only see something once, you will not completely forget it. Instead, it will leave a trace in the depths of your mind. However, because it is insignificant, it will not be remembered by others. Some important things will leave deep memories. However, when these memories are of no use and will not be recalled often, they will gradually be erased and stored deep in the brain. When needed, they can be recalled. However, there will be some vague and uncertain parts. And if you master the memory magic, you can search for the required memory in your brain, just like searching for a book in a library. Forgetting, or even amnesia, in the final analysis is just that the corresponding memory is hidden deep in the brain and cannot be recalled. It will be easily solved with the help of memory magic. The Weasley family gave Finny a kind of warmth that only family members in his previous life could bring him. This also made Finny, who had the idea of making friends with the Weasley family, have a better sense of the Weasley family, and therefore stayed one more day. The Weasleys are indeed very good people. They don't care about Finny's identity, whether he is the heir to the Black family, or whether he is richer than their family. Instead, they treated Finny as a child of the same age as George and Fred, and just a child. No matter what Finny was like, in the eyes of the Weasleys, especially Mrs. Weasley Molly, she was a poor child who lost his parents since childhood and grew up alone. So, she welcomed Finny to stay here for a few more days, and even felt a little reluctant to let Finny leave. During the past 2 days, Finny did not do anything special because of Finny's identity. During these 2 days, Finny and the Weasley family had the same food and accommodation. Molly would scold George and Fred while scolding Finny, who was with them, and would also let Finny go with her children to clean the yard and do some farm work. Although the Weasley family's life was not very good due to economic problems, Mrs. Weasley still ensured that every meal could provide the children with the necessary nutrition. Occasionally, Arthur would find Finny and talk to him about some things in the magic world, pureblood families, some changes in the Ministry of Magic, and would teach Finny many tips for communicating with those officials of the Ministry of Magic. In 2 days, except for Percy's attitude towards Finny, everyone's relationship with Finny improved to a certain extent. Ron especially liked being with Finny because Finny was the only one who would not play tricks on him. But in fact, it was Finny who came up with many of his ideas that were played by the twins and Ginny. But he didn't do it himself. "Are you leaving today?" Ginny looked at Finny with some reluctance and asked. Finny smiled and said to the little girl, "Yeah, I'm leaving today." Arthur looked at Finny and asked, "What are your plans next? Your vacation is only a month away." Finny nodded and said, "I have some plans. Next, I plan to visit the Lovegood family who live not far from here. I have some things to do, and then I plan to ask Professor Dumbledore to help me contact some people." Speaking of this, Finny glanced at George and the others beside him, leaned next to Arthur, and whispered, "After all, those things not only attacked me, but also attacked Hogwarts. I don't think even a great man like Dumbledore would have endured it." Arthur frowned and said, "Finny, maybe you are exposed to many things because of your family, but don't forget that you are just a child." Finny shook his head, waved his hands and said indifferently, "Although I am still a child, I am not someone who refuses to fight back when being bullied. And, as I said, Dumbledore will also take action. At most, I am just a support, providing some information or funds." Finny and Arthur's conversation was very low, like a whisper. Molly, George and his family were very confused when they saw it. The brothers George and Fred were also very curious and came over and put their arms around Finny's neck. "Finny, what did you say to our father? You still have to avoid us?" Finny smiled and did not answer, but waved his hand to Molly and said, "Mrs. Weasley, I'm going to leave now and come back to visit you next time." Molly nodded and said, "Welcome any time." Then Finny nodded to the others before calling out, "Puff." With a snap, Puff, who had been paying attention to Finny, appeared next to him, took Finny's hand, and led him away from the Weasley family's burrow. Finny and Puff didn't leave far, but came to the top of a mountain not far from the burrow. Looking at the burrow not far behind him, Finny always felt that he had forgotten something very important during his visit. However, since it can be forgotten, it means that it is not a particularly important matter, and we will talk about it later. He turned around and started looking for the location of his Lovegood home. He only knew that Lovegood's house was near the burrow, but he didn't know exactly where it was. And just like when going to the burrow, it would be disrespectful to the host to directly apparate into someone else's home for the first official visit. If you know the fireplace, you can go there through the fireplace. However, he voluntarily disconnected the connection between Finny's fireplace and the Floo network because the house was guarded by the loyalty charm, and linking to the Floo network carried the risk of exposure. On the top of a hill not far to the north of the burrow, Finny saw the Lovegood house. It was a huge black cylindrical house, like a huge stone, like in chess. The same as the car. Finny walked towards the house. After walking a certain distance, Finny confirmed that this was indeed the Lovegood house, because there were 3 hand-painted signs hanging on the somewhat dilapidated courtyard door outside the house. Block 1, the Quibbler, Editor-in-Chief, X. Lovegood. Everyone knows that the editor-in-chief of The Quibbler is Shane Lovegood, but he still uses this pseudonym to sell the magazine. Block 2, please choose your own bouquet of mistletoe. This is a very old legend. It is said that mistletoe can prevent witches from coming to your door, and can also ward off bad luck and witchcraft. When visiting other people's homes at certain times, bringing a bunch of mistletoe means that you are yourself and not being attracted by other things. Control, or something else fake. Of course, this is just an old legend. Almost no one in the Muggle world would do this, and the same is true in the magical world. For mistletoe, people's impression is more related to love and romance. Just like the well-known saying, there is no happiness without mistletoe. And the third piece, don't touch the airshiply. This is a mere warning. It is a plant with upside-down fruit that resembles a turnip that grows in Lovegood's yard. Some herbalists in the magical world believe that this plant can improve the ability to accept abnormal things. But the number of herbalists is very good, even negligible compared to the mainstream. The courtyard door creaked open as Finny pushed it open. The various strange plants on both sides of the winding path were not just airship plums. The airship plum is just a fruit on a bush, and there is also a knotweed vine here. On both sides of the door there are 2 old crabapple trees bent by the wind, as well as small red fruits growing on them, and a large mistletoe corolla decorated with white beads. Finny gently broke off a bunch of mistletoe, took it in his hand, and continued walking forward. It didn't take long before I arrived in front of the black building. I gently knocked 3 times with the eagle-shaped knocker on the heavy door. A few seconds later, the door opened, and a man with marshmallow-like white hair hanging on his shoulders came out, slightly misogynistic. The man wore a hat with tassels that went vertically to his nose, an egg-yellow robe, and was barefoot. He looked at Finny in confusion. However, none of these attracted Finny's attention as much as the necklace on his neck at this time. It was a golden necklace, the mark of the Deathly Hallows. Who are you? The man looked at Finny in confusion. Finny bowed to the man and said, Hello, Mr. Zeno Lovegood, I am Phineas Black, and I am here to visit the lady, Ms. Pandora Lovegood. Zeno frowned and asked. I don't remember that my wife knows anyone from the Black family. Looking at Mr. Lovegood, who was a little wary, Finny smiled slightly, expressing his understanding. Indeed, his reputation in the magic world is not very good now. Dumbledore's faction and the neutral faction all suspected that he had some relationship with the mysterious man and was a member of the Death Eaters. The Death Eaters, that is, most of the Pureblood families, believed that he was a traitor and a member of Dumbledore's faction. Therefore, for the neutral, even somewhat isolated and secluded Lovegood family, Finny's arrival was not such a good thing. Finny smiled, stretched out his right hand, let Sheno see the ring on his hand and said, I think Ms. Lovegood also has a similar ring. If you are not sure, you can ask Ms. Lovegood. I don't mind waiting here for a while. Sheno frowned and stared at Finny's eyes for a while. After confirming that Finny would not leave without seeing his wife, or his wife would not leave without clearly stating that she did not want to see him, he turned and walked into the house.